Welcome back, legends. You're at Harryverse X. Another incredible story awaits. What if Freya and Baldur found Harry at age 4 and Norse gods raised him as god of love and immortal light? Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's dive right in. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the Light. The rain had been falling since Tuesday. By Thursday evening it had settled into something mean and patient, the kind of rain that didn't bother hurrying because it had nowhere to be and all the time in the world. It pressed flat against the windows of Privet Drive and turned the street's manicured lawns into something that looked, if you squinted, like the surface of a dark lake. The street lamps made orange smears in the wet air. Every house on the street glowed from within, warm rectangles of television light, the silhouettes of families moving behind frosted glass, the occasional bark of a dog wanting in from the garden. Number 4 looked like the rest of them. That was, Freya thought, the point. She stood at the end of the drive with rain moving through her the way weather moved through immortals, present but unconvincing, like a child trying to frighten a mountain. Her hair, which in the halls of Vanaheim moved like something alive and golden, hung still around her shoulders. She had dressed for the mortal world, dark coat, dark boots, nothing that would make the neighbors twitch a curtain. Beside her, Baldur stood with his hands in his pockets, and even dressed in grey wool he managed to look like someone had carved him out of something worth keeping. "You felt it from Asgard," he said. It wasn't a question. "I felt it from the edge of the Bifrost," Freya said. "Like something screaming very quietly." Baldur tilted his head toward the house the way he tilted his head toward everything, with that particular, unhurried attention that had always made Odin uncomfortable and made Freya love him. "It's coming from inside." "Yes. What kind of magic feels like that?" Freya was quiet for a moment. The rain ticked against the pavement. A car moved through the water at the end of the street, headlights sweeping briefly across the facades of identical houses. "Sacrificial," she said. "The deepest kind. Someone died for something in there, and the magic of it hasn't finished yet." She paused. "It's been saturating whatever is inside that house for years. Long enough to sink into the walls. Long enough to sink into whoever is living in it." Baldur looked at her. "Years," he repeated. "At least 3. He turned back to the house, and something shifted in his expression, not dramatically, because Baldur rarely did anything dramatically except by accident, but it was there. A quieting. The particular stillness that came over him when something mattered. "Then we should go inside," he said. They walked up the drive. The lock on the front door was the mortal kind, which meant it was also the courtesy kind, the kind you used when you wanted to respect the boundary between your world and someone else's. Freya considered courtesy for about half a second, then considered the quality of the magic she had felt from the Bifrost's edge, and put her hand flat against the door. It opened without argument. The house was quiet in that over-careful way that houses get when the people inside them are performing normalcy rather than living it. Too tidy. The kind of tidy that took effort, that required constant vigilance, that meant someone in this house was always watching to make sure everything stayed in its approved position. The sitting room to the left held a massive television, a floral sofa, a cabinet of trophies and photographs. Every photograph was of the same pink, wide-faced boy at various ages. None of the photographs were of anyone else. Baldur stopped in the hallway and looked toward the stairs. "Under," he said quietly. Freya had already felt it the moment the door opened, in fact, because the closer you got to it the less it felt like a sensation and the more it felt like a sound, except it wasn't a sound at all. It was closer to what happened when you walked into a room where someone had been crying for a very long time. The air itself remembered. The cupboard under the stairs had a latch on the outside. Freya looked at it for a long moment. A latch. On the outside. The kind you put on something you wanted to keep shut. She felt Baldur go still beside her, and she knew he'd seen it too, and she knew by the quality of his stillness that he was managing himself very carefully because the alternative was something neither of them could afford right now. She had always loved that about him, the way his self-control looked effortless and cost everything. She lifted the latch. The door swung open, and the smell hit her first, something small and enclosed, a child's smell, sleep and unwashed hair and something else underneath it, something medicinal and old, like a wound that had been dealt with but not healed. And in the dark, curled on a cot that was roughly the size of a large dog's bed, surrounded by the vague shapes of cleaning supplies and broken umbrellas and boxes of things that had been deemed not important enough for proper storage, was a child. He was tiny. That was the first thing. Freya had known mortal children, had loved them, had watched them, had grieved them in the long way immortals grieved the short-lived things they came to love, and she knew that a child of 4 should not look like this one looked. The bones of his wrist, curled under his chin as he slept, were too sharp. His face was thin in a way that made his eyes, even closed, look too large for it. His dark hair went every direction, hopelessly, as if it had given up on the concept of order entirely. He wore a shirt that had belonged to someone 3 sizes larger than him, and he'd pulled it over his knees for warmth. There was a pair of glasses on the shelf above his head, one arm held on with tape. And from him, from the center of him, from somewhere in the chest where a mortal would have a heartbeat and something older would have a light, the magic poured. Not dramatically. Not invisible waves or shimmering auras, nothing that the neighbors would see if they happened to glance through a window. But in the spectrum in which gods perceived the world, the spectrum where love and sacrifice and ancient power existed as colors that had no mortal name, this child was incandescent. Freya stood in the doorway of the cupboard under the stairs and looked at this small, thin, sleeping boy, and the magic coming off him hit her like standing in front of an open hearth. Warm. Fierce. Old in a way that had nothing to do with age. Like touching the memory of a woman who had walked into death with her arms open and her love held in front of her like a shield. I know this, Freya thought. I know what this is made of. She had stood at bedsides. She had collected the honored dead. She had felt the particular quality of love that made someone lay themselves down between a weapon and the thing it was aimed at. She had felt it in battle meadows, in burning houses, in the cold quiet after a siege when a father's last thought was still somehow present in the air like a handprint on glass. She had never felt it this concentrated. Never felt it living in someone rather than leaving them. Behind her, she heard Baldur make a sound she'd never heard from him before. It was very small, barely there, but Baldur was a god who had been loved by everything in creation and feared by nothing, and for him to make that sound meant something had moved inside him with enough force that it came out. The child's eyes opened. They were green. The particular green of new leaves in early spring, the color the world went right at the edge of winter breaking, and they were enormous in his thin face, and for 3 full seconds he looked at Freya with no expression at all, the careful blankness of a small creature that had learned very young not to show a reaction before it knew whether a reaction was safe. Then he looked past her at Baldur, and something changed in his face. Not fear. Something more complicated than fear. Baldur, even in wool and grey, radiated. It was not something he could turn off. His light existed in the same spectrum as the boy's love magic, and when the child looked at him there was a flash of recognition, not personal recognition, nothing so simple, but the kind of recognition that happened between things that were made of similar materials. The child's magic reached, the way a plant reaches for light, and Baldur's light responded. The boy sat up. "Hello," he said. His voice was small and careful and shaped around the vowels with the particular precision of a child who had been told, more than once, not to be too loud. "Hello," Freya said. She crouched down to his level, which brought her eye to eye with him, and she watched him recalibrate. She could feel him doing it, feel him reading her the way children read adults when they have learned that adults require reading for survival. He was looking for the angle. The catch. The thing she wanted that she would make his problem. "My name is Freya," she said. "This is Baldur. We're not from here." The boy absorbed this. "From where, then?" he asked. "Somewhere much better than here," she said, and she let the honesty of it come through, not performance, not comfort speak, just fact, and he heard it. She could tell by the slight shift in his eyes that he heard it. "What's your name?" Baldur asked from behind her. Harry, the boy said. And then, with the careful addendum of a child who had been corrected for forgetting it, Potter. Just Harry is fine, Freya said. He looked at the open door of the cupboard. He looked at her. He looked at the dark hallway beyond, where the house was quiet and the family that had latched him in here was asleep upstairs. Something moved across his face, that calculation again, that careful weighing, and she felt him make a decision. Are you taking me somewhere? He asked. Yes, Freya said. No hesitation. Away from here? Yes. He looked at his glasses on the shelf. He reached up and took them, unfolded them, put them on his face with both hands the way you put on something important. Then he slid off the cot, stood up, he barely reached her shoulder, he was so small, and looked at her with those extraordinary green eyes and said, "All right." Just like that. All right. As if he had been waiting for someone to come, and had decided, with the unshakable pragmatism of a 4-year-old who had learned that adults meant what they did and not what they said, that this was a better option than the one he currently had. Freya stood up, took his hand, and walked him out of the cupboard. She didn't let go of his hand in the hallway. She wasn't sure she could have if she tried. Baldur had moved to the staircase and stood at the bottom of it, looking up into the dark of the upper floor with an expression that was very, very quiet. Not blank, quiet. There was a considerable difference. Freya could read Baldur the way she could read weather, and what she read in him now was the particular quality of a man who was choosing, moment by moment, not to do something he could not take back. She's upstairs, Freya said, low enough not to carry. The ant. She knew. I know. His voice was even. Too even. She didn't do this to him out of malice, Freya said, and felt Harry's small hand tighten in hers. She did it out of fear. The magic frightened her. That's not the same as it being acceptable, Baldur said. No. It's not. She looked at the staircase, then back at him. We're leaving. That's what matters. We're taking him and leaving. Baldur held her gaze for a moment, and she held his, and something passed between them, the kind of communication that happened between two people who had known each other across centuries and didn't need words for the big things anymore. He nodded once, turned away from the stairs, and looked down at Harry. Harry looked up at him. The light that perpetually, gently emanated from Baldur was doing something Freya had never quite seen it do before. It was reaching, almost like a color becoming warmer, pulled by the boy's presence the way certain flowers tracked a moving sun. And Harry, who had been cautious and still and carefully quiet since waking, who had been managing himself like someone 3 times his age, looked at Baldur's face and his whole body did something it probably hadn't done in a very long time. It relaxed. Not fully. Not completely. But enough that his shoulders came down from around his ears, and the thin line of his mouth softened at the corners, and for just a moment he looked exactly like what he was, a 4-year-old who was very tired, and had found something that felt like safety, and didn't quite know what to do with it. I like your light, Harry said to Baldur, with the absolute directness of a small child who had not yet learned that noticing things about people was considered rude. Baldur looked at him. I like yours, he said. Harry frowned. I don't have a light. You do, Baldur said. You just can't see it yet. They took him out through the front door, back into the rain. Harry walked between them, holding Freya's hand, looking at the rain with the mild interest of a child who had presumably seen rain before but was currently cataloguing everything as potential information. He hadn't asked where they were going again. He hadn't asked about clothes, or food, or any of the things that a child might reasonably ask when 2 strangers appeared in the night and walked him out of his home. He asked, at the end of the drive, will they look for me? Freya considered lying. She decided against it, both because she was not built for useful lies and because this child, she suspected, would know the difference. Your aunt might, she said. For a while. Harry processed this. Not my uncle. No. He processed that too. Okay, he said. They reached the end of Privet Drive, and Freya felt the Bifrost responding to her, felt the connection she'd had with Heimdall since before this street existed, since before England existed, an awareness as natural as breathing. She looked at Baldur over Harry's head. "He'll need to not be afraid," she said. Baldur crouched down in front of Harry, rain falling on his shoulders, and his expression was the same one Freya had seen him use with things that were young and cautious and needed something from him he wasn't sure how to give, that combination of warmth and steadiness that was uniquely, entirely his. "We're going to travel," he said. "It will feel like falling and like flying at the same time, and it will be very bright and very loud and it will be over quickly. You won't be hurt." Harry looked at him. "Falling and flying at the same time?" "Yes. How can it be both?" "Because most things worth doing don't fit into one category," Baldur said, and the corner of his mouth moved. "Are you ready?" Harry thought about it. He looked at Privet Drive, the street, the houses, the number 4 on the door he'd come out of, the orange smear of the street lamps in the rain. He looked for a long moment, long enough that Freya felt something in her chest tighten because she was watching a 4-year-old decide whether or not to leave everything he had ever known, which was not much, and was nothing good, but was still everything. Then he turned away from it. Turned back to them. Took Freya's hand and then reached out and took Baldur's. "Ready," he said. The Bifrost opened. The Bridge of the Gods was not a comfortable thing, the first time. It was not uncomfortable, precisely, not for something under divine protection, held between two gods, but comfortable was not the word for being moved between worlds at the speed of light while reality fractured and reassembled around you in colors that had never been named in any mortal language. It was enormous. It was loud in the way that enormousness was loud, not with sound, exactly, but with presence, with the feeling of everything that had ever been happening all at once. Harry, held between Freya and Baldur, made a sound that started as something that might have been a scream and turned, somewhere in the middle of the crossing, into a laugh. A pure, astonished, completely involuntary laugh, the kind a child makes when something is so far beyond their experience that their body doesn't have another response available. And then they were on the Bifrost Bridge, and Asgard was in front of them. Freya watched Harry see it. She had lived in Asgard for long enough that she moved through it the way she moved through her own heartbeat, present, constant, part of the background of herself. She had forgotten, entirely, what it looked like the first time. She remembered now, watching his face, because his face was doing something extraordinary. Both his hands tightened on the hands holding them, not from fear, but from the sheer physical force of receiving something beautiful. His eyes went wide behind his taped glasses. His mouth fell open. Asgard at night was, there was no modest way to describe it. The towers caught the light of stars and gave it back differently, made it warm and gold and living. The bridge stretched out before them in iridescent panels that shifted color with each step. Below, the Bifrost's light made the dark sea of space glow at its edges in colors that shouldn't have been possible. Ahead, the city rose in levels, each one lit from within, and the whole of it had the quality of something that had been built by people who didn't believe in the concept of too much. "Oh," Harry breathed. "Just that." "Oh." Heimdall was at the end of the bridge, as he always was, as he had always been since the beginning of things, with his golden armor and his all-seeing eyes and his expression that was somewhere between inscrutably ancient and completely unsurprised. He looked down at Harry with those extraordinary eyes, the eyes that saw all of the 9 realms at once, that had watched everything that had ever moved in the light, and Harry looked back at him. Most mortals didn't look directly at Heimdall. It was instinct, the way it was instinct not to stare at an eclipse. Harry looked directly at him and tilted his head slightly, in the exact manner Baldur tilted his head at things, though he had known Baldur for approximately 6 minutes. "He sees clearly," Heimdall said. "Not to Freya. Not to Baldur. To Harry." "I see you glow," Harry said. "Different from him, though." A nod at Baldur. "You glow like watching, not like being. If that makes sense." Heimdall was quiet for a moment. "It makes sense," he said. "What's your name?" Heimdall. I'm Harry. I know, Heimdall said, and there was something in it, not ominous, but weighted, the word of someone who had watched this moment approach across years of seeing, that made Freya's breath catch. Heimdall did not give weight lightly. Welcome to Asgard, Harry. The Hall of Gladsheim was lit when they arrived, which meant Odin had been told, which meant Heimdall had reached ahead of them, which he always did, which was the point of Heimdall. Freya walked through the great doors with Harry's hand in hers and felt the shift in the room the way you felt pressure change before a storm, the gathering of attention, the alignment of eyes. Frigga was the first person she saw. Frigga, seated beside the fire with the ease of a woman who had been queen of everything long enough that waiting was just another form of ruling, rose when they came in and crossed the room with the particular velocity of a woman who had already decided something and was simply walking toward the confirmation of it. She arrived in front of Harry and stopped. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked up at her. Frigga was beautiful the way certainty was beautiful, not soft, not decorative, but real, something you could put weight on. She had been mother to gods. She had wept for one of them in a grief so large it had changed the weather of every realm. She looked at this small, thin, impossibly bright child with his taped glasses and his oversized shirt and his enormous careful eyes, and her face did something very simple. It opened. "Hello, little one," she said, her voice soft. "Hello," Harry said. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at Baldur, with that involuntary relaxing, that careful creature recognizing something safe. "Are you his mother?" A glance at Baldur. "I am," Frigga said. Harry considered this. "You're very tall," he said. Something shifted in Frigga's expression that was very close to what happened in Freya when she laughed but needed not to. "So I've been told," she said gravely. She crouched to his level, the way Freya had in the cupboard, and looked at him directly. "Are you hungry?" Harry's face did something complicated, a flash of something Freya recognized, the particular conflict of a child who had learned that wanting things was dangerous and that saying yes could be wrong. He managed it quickly, flattened it, and said, "A bit." "A bit," Frigga repeated, and she held out her hand, and Harry, after a fraction of a second, took it. "Come with me, then. We'll see about a bit." She led him toward the back of the hall without looking at Freya or Baldur, and Freya watched them go, her mother-in-law and the child she had found in a cupboard, walking side by side as if this had been arranged long ago and they were simply getting around to it, and felt something settle in her chest. Heavy and warm, like an anchor finding the bottom of a deep sea. Then Odin spoke, and the warm thing held steady, but the air changed. "Freya." She turned. Odin was seated in the high chair at the end of the hall, not formally, not with the ceremony of court, but with the weight of someone who had been sitting with a thought long enough that the thought had become a position. His ravens were absent. His eye, the remaining one, was fixed on her with that particular quality it had, the quality of something that had traded enormously for knowledge and had never quite forgiven itself for the peace it felt about the trade. "All-Father," she said. Beside her, Baldur stood quietly. "You've brought a mortal child into Asgard," Odin said. "I've brought a child," Freya said. "The mortal part is a detail. Details have a way of becoming considerable. This one won't," she said. And because she was Freya, because she was the goddess who had ridden with him to more battlefields than either of them had names for, who had half his honor dead in her hall, who had known him since before the words for what she was had existed, she met his eye and held it. "He's ours now. That's decided." Odin looked at her for a long time. He looked at Baldur. Baldur, who said nothing, who simply stood there with that infuriating, luminous patience, and met his father's gaze with the specific quality of a man who had already decided and was not interested in arguing. Odin was the wisest being in the 9 realms. He had made trades that would have destroyed lesser beings. He had looked at the shape of fate and made choices with the full understanding of what they would cost. He looked at his son, and at Freya, and through the doorway where his wife had just taken a small green-eyed boy toward the kitchens, and he did what the wise sometimes did when they encountered something true. He let it be. He'll need a name, Odin said. Something that fits what he is. He has a name, Freya said. Harry. And the other part? Baldur spoke for the first time since they'd entered. Baldurson, he said. Simply. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water, and the rings of it spread outward, and nobody in that hall said anything for a long moment. Then Odin sat back, and something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, but was a thing that lived in the same country. Harr Baldurson, he said, testing the shape of it. It'll do. They fed him. That was the first thing, that before any conversation about magic or prophecy or the nature of sacrificial love or the logistics of raising a mortal child among gods, before any of that, Frigga sat Harry at the long kitchen table and put food in front of him. Real food. Hot food. The kind of food that Asgardian kitchens produced without thinking, the kind that would have been extraordinary by any mortal standard. Harry ate with the focused, thorough, slightly desperate attention of a child who had been hungry often enough that food was not something you left on the table. Frigga sat across from him and talked to him, not about anything important, just easy things, the kind of talk that let a child eat without feeling watched, and he answered between bites with the careful correctness of someone who had learned that good manners were armor. Freya sat at the end of the table and watched. I like the bread, Harry said. It tastes like, he paused, trying to find the comparison and not having the reference for it. It tastes like it means it, he finished, and looked slightly uncertain about whether that made sense. It does mean it, Frigga said, as if this were a perfectly standard observation. Everything made here is made with intention. You can taste the difference. Harry considered this seriously. Does everything here taste good because of magic? Some of it's magic, Frigga said. Some of it's just that the person making it cares. Harry looked at the bread in his hand. The food at my aunt's house doesn't taste like that, he said, and the way he said it was purely informational, purely observational, with no bid for sympathy and no performance of sadness, just a fact being filed alongside other facts, the quiet accounting of a child who had developed an excellent internal ledger. Frigga's jaw tightened very slightly. Freya saw it. Well, Frigga said, after a moment, you're here now. He looked at her. For how long? Frigga glanced at Freya. Freya leaned forward, elbows on the table, and looked at Harry directly. He'd put down the bread and was watching her with those eyes that were too old for his face and too honest to be anything but what they were. That depends on what you want, she said. He blinked. What I want? Yes. He stared at her. The concept seemed to be loading slowly, like something encountering unfamiliar terrain. Adults don't usually ask me that, he said. No, Freya agreed. We're not usual adults. You're not adults at all, he said, with the kind of bluntness that surfaced in children before social anxiety had time to intercept it. You're something else. Freya looked at Baldur, who was standing in the doorway with his arms folded and his expression doing that thing it did when he was quietly delighted by something. She looked back at Harry. Yes, she said. What gave us away? The glow, he said immediately. And the bridge. And the sky doesn't look right here, it's too many colors. And you walked through the rain without getting wet. He pushed his glasses up his nose with one finger. I noticed. You notice a lot, Freya said. It's important to notice things, he said, with the absolute conviction of someone who had learned this the hard way. Freya felt something shift inside her, something that was not sorrow exactly but was adjacent to it. That was what happened when you recognized the shape of a survival mechanism in something too small to need one. She breathed through it. Harry, she said. We want you to stay. Not for a while. Not as a visit. We want you to stay here, with us, with Baldur and me, and grow up here. In Asgard. As ours. She held his gaze. Is that something you want? He looked at her for a long time. Long enough that Frigga had gone very still and Baldur had straightened in the doorway and even the fire seemed to be holding itself. The whole room was quiet with the weight of a choice being made by someone who had never been given a real one before. "Will you put a latch on the outside of my door?" he asked. "No," Freya said immediately. "Promise?" The word was very small. He said it the way you say a word when you're not sure it works, when you've heard other people use it and understand it in theory but have limited personal evidence that it means what it's supposed to mean. Freya reached across the table and took his small, too thin hand in both of hers, and she felt his magic flare at the contact, that incredible concentrated warmth, that love light that his mother had died to give him, and she felt her own magic answer it, because she was Freya and love was her first language and this, whatever this was something she already recognized as true. "I promise," she said. Harry looked at her. He looked at Baldur. He looked at Frigga, who was looking back at him with her heart completely visible in her face, which was something Frigga did not typically do and which meant that what she was feeling had simply exceeded her ability to contain it. He nodded. "Okay," he said. "I'll stay." Then he picked up the bread and took another bite, because he was 4 years old and very hungry, and some things were simple even when they were enormous. Later, much later, when Harry was asleep in a room that had been hastily but warmly prepared, in a bed that was nothing like a cupboard cot, with Frigga having stayed until his breathing evened out and then sitting for another while after that just because, Freya found Baldur on the bridge outside the hall. He was leaning on the railing with his face toward the sky, which was doing what the sky in Asgard did at night, showing you more stars than any mortal atmosphere would allow, each one bright enough to cast a faint shadow. She stood beside him. For a while neither of them said anything. "The magic in him," Baldur said, finally. "It's not normal sacrificial residue." "No," Freya agreed. "It's active," he said. "I've seen magic left by sacrifice before. It lingers. It fades. This isn't fading, it's growing. Something anchored it to him when it was cast, and it's been building ever since." He turned to look at her. "Do you know what that means?" "It means his mother's death wasn't just a sacrifice," Freya said. "It was a working. Intentional or not, she wove something. Love that strong, offered freely for a specific life, at the moment of death, it became a permanent enchantment. A shield. A mark." She paused. "A power." Baldur was quiet. "It resonates with me," he said. "Not easily, it cost something to say it. The quality of it. The invulnerability." Freya looked at him. "I know. It's not the same thing," he said quickly. "No. His doesn't come from being loved by everything in creation. His comes from being loved by one person enough that she stopped existing for it." Freya looked at the stars. "In some ways that's a different kind. In some ways it's more personal." Baldur was quiet again. "Then, he noticed my light." "He notices everything," Freya said. "He called it being, not shining or glowing, he said it was the light of being." Baldur's voice was careful, the way it got when he was handling something he didn't want to drop. "He's 4 years old." "He's Harry," Freya said, as if that explained it, and found that it did. The stars moved overhead. Somewhere inside the hall, a small boy slept in a real bed for probably the first time in his life, with his mother's love burning in his chest like a coal that would never go out, and around him Asgard rested in its ancient, golden permanence. Freya pressed her shoulder against Baldur's. "We'll teach him everything," she said. "Everything?" He said, and there was something in it, warmth, and a kind of careful wonder that didn't come to him often. "That's a considerable promise." "I'm good at those," she said. He smiled. It was the smile he had, the one that had, famously, made every living thing in the 9 realms fall slightly in love with him for approximately 1,000 years, and which he deployed rarely enough that it still worked. "Yes," he said. "You are." They stood on the bridge in the starlight of Asgard, and the rain was still falling somewhere far below, on a street called Privet Drive, where the house with the number 4 had a cupboard under its stairs with a latch on the outside and a cold, empty cot inside it. And Harry Potter, who was going to be Harry no longer Potter, slept the deep and total sleep of a child who had, against considerable odds, come home. Chapter 2, 7 Years of Gold. The first morning Harry woke in Asgard, he came downstairs before anyone else. Freya found him in the kitchen, standing on a chair he'd pushed to the window, looking out at the city with his glasses slightly crooked and his dark hair absolutely chaotic, utterly still in the way that children were still when they'd forgotten to perform normalcy because nobody was watching. She stood in the doorway for a moment and just looked at him, the thin shoulders, the too big shirt he'd slept in, the intensity of his focus, and felt that warmth again, the anchoring thing, settle deeper. "It's bigger than yesterday," he said, without turning around. "It looks different in the light," she said, crossing to the kitchen and starting the fire under the pot the way she'd done 1,000 mornings before, except it had never felt like this before, which was interesting. "Every time of day it looks like something else. I like it best right now," he said. "When it's gold." She looked at him. "You're describing yourself." He turned at that, frowning. "I'm not gold." "Not yet," she said. He looked at her for a moment with those two perceptive eyes, decided she was telling the truth rather than being interesting, and turned back to the window. "When does everyone else wake up?" "Late," Freya said. "Gods aren't early risers." "Baldur is," Harry said, with great confidence. Freya paused. "What makes you say that?" "He looks like someone who wakes up early," Harry said, with perfect 4-year-old logic, and Freya discovered she was laughing before she'd decided to. He was right, as it happened. Baldur was always awake first. The question of what Harry was, what he was becoming, what he could become, resolved itself not through any grand council or formal declaration, but through the ordinary accumulation of days. He didn't slot into Asgard the way a mortal child should have, with difficulty and foreignness and the careful adjustments of someone learning a new place. He slid into it. Like a key finding a lock it was made for, except the key had been shaped somewhere else entirely and the lock had been waiting without knowing it was waiting. Freya started teaching him her magic at 4 years old, which was approximately 800 years earlier than she'd have started with anyone else, and she did it because she had no choice. The love magic in him, his mother's gift, that fierce concentrated working, was alive and restless and needed direction the way a river needed a channel or it would simply go everywhere and ruin the furniture. She sat with him in the hall of her own longhouse in Vanaheim, in the late afternoons when the light came through the high windows in long warm bars, and she taught him the first language she'd ever learned. Not spells. Not incantations. Not the precise wand movements and Latin phrases the mortal magical world used. Those were tools, good ones, useful the way a hammer was useful, but not what she was teaching. She was teaching him the grammar of love magic, which was a different thing entirely. It was the understanding that love was not an emotion that produced magic but a force that magic was built from. That sacrifice and connection and fierce uncomplicated wanting good for someone were structural elements of reality, the same way heat and cold were structural elements of weather. Harry learned this quickly. Too quickly, honestly, for it to be entirely about instruction. It was more like reminding. "Do it again," she said, the afternoon of the 3rd week, watching him hold a small flame in his hands that was not fire-colored but had a quality of warmth that fire didn't have. "It feels weird," he said, not moving, keeping his hands cupped around it. The light shifted between gold and something else, something that had no color name but registered as safe. "Like it's coming from somewhere I didn't know I had." "Where does it feel like it's coming from?" He thought about it. "My middle," he said. "Your chest." "Lower." "Higher." "Both." He frowned. "It feels like when Frigga puts her hand on my head when I'm going to sleep. Like that but from inside." Freya looked at the light in his hands. "That's the most accurate description of love magic I've ever heard from anyone," she said. He looked up. "Is it? Including people who have used it for 1,000 years." He looked back down at his hands, and the light steadied, and brightened, not dramatically, not with any ceremony, just the natural brightening of something that had been told it was doing the right thing. Thor found Harry 3 weeks after his arrival, which meant that Thor had been told to wait 3 weeks, which meant Frigga had spoken to him, which meant the conversation had probably been brief and extremely clear. He turned up at the training grounds one morning when Harry had followed Freya out to watch the warriors and sat himself at the top of the fence like a small, observant bird. Thor at this point in his life was enormous, boisterous, and constitutionally incapable of doing anything at less than full commitment. He saw the child on the fence, recognized him from Frigga's description, and made the strategic decision to treat him exactly as he'd have treated a warrior who'd wandered in looking for something to do. "You," he said, pointing. "Do you want to learn to fight?" Harry looked at him. "You're Thor," he said. "I am," Thor said. "You're louder than I expected," Harry said. Thor stared at him. Then he laughed, a full, chest-borne, entirely delighted laugh that scattered the ravens off the training ground roof and made 3 warriors look up from their sparring. "I like this one," he announced to nobody in particular. "Yes, I am loud. Everything worth doing is loud. Do you want to learn to fight or not?" Harry considered the question with the seriousness he gave all questions. "Can I watch first?" "Watch," Thor repeated, as if the concept were mildly foreign. "I learn better watching first," Harry said. "Then doing." Thor looked at him for a long moment. "Fine," he said. "Watch." He proceeded to demonstrate approximately 12 different combat forms over the next hour, with the slightly increased vigor of a man who was performing for an audience, and Harry sat on the fence the whole time with his knees pulled to his chest and his chin on his knees and watched everything. Not the flashy parts. Not the Mjolnir throws and the thunder punctuation. He watched footwork. He watched balance. He watched where Thor put his weight before a strike, and which direction his shoulders telegraphed, and how he breathed. When Thor stopped, sweating and satisfied, he looked at the boy. "Well, your left side is slower when you're about to throw," Harry said. Thor's eyebrows went up. "Not by much," Harry said, fairly. "But it is." Thor was quiet for a moment. "Get down off the fence," he said. Harry got down. "Show me what you do about it," Thor said, and held out his arm, offering his balance and his footwork as demonstration material, with the specific generosity of a teacher who'd just been surprised and was interested in the shape of what had surprised him. That was the beginning of Thor and Harry. The training that followed was not gentle, and Harry didn't want it to be. This was a thing Freya noticed early and stored carefully. He had no interest in ease. He had, in fact, a specific and apparently instinctive distrust of anything given too easily, which made a painful kind of sense given where he'd come from, and which she kept watch on to make sure it didn't calcify into something self-destructive. But in the context of training it was purely useful. He worked until he fell over. He got up. He fell over again. He got up again. He didn't complain. He asked questions constantly, which Thor found baffling and ultimately deeply satisfying. By 6, he could outmaneuver warriors twice his size through pure positioning and the specific tactical clarity of a child who approached problems without the preconceptions that adult fighters carried. He wasn't strong, he was 4 feet tall and built like a sparrow, but he was fast in the way that small things were fast when they'd stopped being afraid of large things, and he read a fight the way he'd read Privet Drive, with the patient attention of someone who understood that the environment always told you what it was going to do before it did it. Baldur taught him something harder. He didn't call it a lesson, and it didn't happen in a formal setting, it happened the way everything Baldur taught happened, which was slowly and sideways and usually while doing something else entirely. They walked together a lot, across the Bifrost, through the gardens, along the outer edges of the city where the buildings gave way to the enormous open sky of Asgard. Harry would talk, because Harry talked to Baldur the way he talked to nobody else, with the free-running and censored conversation of a child who had found someone who actually listened instead of waiting to respond, and Baldur would listen, and occasionally say something, and what he said had a way of landing differently than other things. When Harry was 5, they were watching the stars from the outer wall and Harry asked, why does your light not go away when you go inside? It doesn't have an off, Baldur said. Everything has an off, Harry said, with the certainty of someone who had operated light switches. Not this, Baldur said. My light isn't separate from me. It's not something I produce. It's what I am. The way your warmth isn't separate from you, it's part of the fact that you're alive. You can't turn off being alive. Harry sat with this. So you can't hide it? No. Does that bother you? Baldur looked at him. Why would it? Because everything can see you, Harry said. All the time. You can't be invisible. No, Baldur agreed. But I can be very still, and stillness is its own kind of invisible. Most people don't look at what doesn't move. Harry absorbed this with the focused expression of someone filing it under important. I can't be still, he admitted. You can, Baldur said. You're still right now. Harry looked at his own hands. He was still. He hadn't noticed. What's the difference between hiding and being still, he asked. Baldur was quiet for a moment, and Harry had learned by now that Baldur's quiet was not absence of answer but the specific pause of someone deciding to tell the truth rather than the easier thing. Hiding is about fear, he said. Stillness is about choice. You're still because you want to be here, in this moment. Not because you're afraid of being seen. Harry looked at the stars for a long time. I was afraid of being seen, he said, quietly. Before. I know, Baldur said. I'm not anymore. I know that too, Baldur said. They sat together in the enormous Asgardian dark, the boy who shone without knowing it and the god who had always shone whether he wanted to or not, and the night moved over them. Loki arrived when Harry was 6, and was entirely, immediately, and thoroughly interested. This was not guaranteed. Loki's interest was selective and unpredictable, and when directed at something or someone was an experience roughly comparable to being examined by something extremely intelligent with no social contract about what it would say with what it found. He arrived at the training ground where Harry was working with one of Thor's warriors, watched for a few minutes, and then said, quite loudly, "You're doing that wrong." Harry stopped. Looked at him. Which part? All of it, Loki said pleasantly. But specifically the part where you're fighting his fight instead of making him fight yours. Harry tilted his head, Baldur's gesture, completely absorbed. What's the difference? Loki sat down on the low wall with the ease of someone who owned all the walls everywhere by virtue of finding them useful. Come here and I'll show you. That was the beginning of Loki and Harry, and it was a more complicated thing than Thor and Harry, because Loki was a more complicated person than Thor, and because Harry's particular combination of Freya's love magic and Baldur's teachings and Thor's training had produced a child who was almost impossible to trick, not because he was suspicious, but because he was clear. He saw what things were rather than what they presented as, which was, for someone like Loki, both the most annoying and most fascinating quality imaginable. You can't lie to me, Harry told him, at the end of the first week. Interesting theory, Loki said. What makes you think so? I don't know, Harry said. When someone says something that isn't true, it feels like when you bite into something that looks right but tastes wrong. Your lies feel like that. He considered. Most people's lies feel like that. Yours are better, though. More like when something tastes mostly right but there's one thing off. Loki looked at him for a moment. And what flavor am I right now? Completely honest, Harry said. Which means you're either telling me the truth or lying so completely it's become its own kind of truth. Loki stared at him. Then, with the specific expression of a man encountering something genuinely unexpected, he said, How old are you? 6, Harry said. Remarkable, Loki said, and it sounded like the most sincere thing he'd ever said. What Loki taught Harry was not combat. What Loki taught him was thinking, specifically, the kind of thinking that understood that most conflicts were solved before they started by the person who had already considered more possibilities than anyone else in the room. He taught him to see angles. To follow consequences forward. To ask not what does this person want but why do they want it and what does that tell me about what they'll do next. He taught him the architecture of motivation, which was something that came naturally to Harry because of Freya's magic. Love, after all, was nothing if not the practice of understanding what someone needed, but which Loki systematized in a way that made it a tool rather than just an instinct. He also taught him chess, and Harry became devastatingly good at it within a year, which Loki found alternately wonderful and personally offensive. You saw that 12 moves ago, Loki said, the afternoon of what had been, until 4 minutes ago, a match Loki was winning. 8, Harry said. I saw it 8 moves ago. And you let me think I was winning until now? You looked like you were enjoying it, Harry said, with complete sincerity, and Loki stared at him with an expression that was 1 part affronted and 3 parts something that looked, if you knew where to look, extremely much like affection. You absolute menace, Loki said. Harry grinned. He'd grown into his grin by 7, it was lopsided, a little bright, the kind of smile that appeared in the specific overlap of genuine warmth and mischief, and it was entirely his own. Frigga gave him something different. Not formal lessons, she wasn't inclined to formality with Harry the way she wasn't inclined to formality with the things she actually loved, reserving ceremony for situations that required distance. What she gave him was reading, and stories, and the kind of knowledge that didn't come from training but from the accumulated practice of paying attention across an enormous span of time. She taught him the 9 realms. Not geography, he could learn geography anywhere, but the feeling of them, the texture of each one's magic and culture and grief and history. She taught him the languages, which he learned with an ease that raised her eyebrows and that she eventually attributed to the love magic in him, because language, at its root, was nothing but the need to be understood by someone, and Harry's whole being was constructed around that frequency. He learned Asgardian quickly. He learned to read the old scripts by 7. He learned Old Norse, and fragments of Elvish, and the trade pidgin of the merchant routes between realms, and the specific dialect of symbol and gesture that dwarven crafters used because they didn't trust spoken words with technical information. You're storing everything, Frigga said one afternoon, watching him work through a text that would have given university scholars pause. There might be a use for it, he said. Most of it won't have a use, she said. He looked up. Loki says the things that don't seem useful are the ones you need most when you actually need something. Loki, Frigga said, with the tone of a woman who had been navigating Loki's influence on the people she loved for several centuries, is not wrong. She taught him something else, quietly, over years, something she never named and would have deflected if Harry had tried to name it. She taught him how to hold grief. Not how to avoid it, not how to work through it as a problem to be solved, but how to carry it as the specific weight it was without it becoming your shape. Frigga knew more about grief than almost anyone in the 9 realms, in the way that you knew things that had been inside you long enough to become structural. She taught him this by simply doing it near him, by mentioning Baldur's first death in passing and carrying the memory of it openly and going on. By loving Loki's chaos and Thor's blundering and Odin's impossible distances without asking any of them to be different. By loving Harry himself, exactly as he was, without once requiring him to be someone more manageable. Harry was 8 when he asked her, one evening, about his mother. The question surprised him as much as it surprised her. It came out unexpectedly, prompted by nothing in particular, while they were sitting by the fire in her hall with books and the comfortable quiet that had grown up between them over years. He asked it before he'd decided to ask it, which was generally when the important things came out. Frigga put down her book. She looked at him with her full attention, which was a different thing from her ordinary attention, which was already considerable. I don't know much about her, Harry said quickly. No one who does there isn't anyone I can ask. Not really. He paused. Freya found me because of her magic. Because of what she left in me. So she must have been, he stopped. Remarkable, Frigga said quietly. Yeah. He looked at his hands. Was she brave? To do what she did? Frigga said. Absolutely. Did she love me? Frigga leaned forward, and her hand came to rest over his, and she said, "Harry, you are made of it." The love she had for you didn't just protect you, it became part of you. Everything you are, everything you're becoming, the magic that called Freya across realms to find you, all of it started with how much she loved you. She held his gaze. You know how Freya taught you that love is structural? That it's a force things are built from? He nodded. Your mother built you from it, Frigga said. Intentionally or not. You are the most literal example of her love that exists. Every time you use your magic, every time you make someone feel safe or seen or warm, that's her too. Harry sat with this for a long time. The fire moved. The hall was quiet. I should find out more, he said finally. When I'm older. About her. You should, Frigga agreed. He nodded, with the resolution of someone adding something to a list. Then he picked up his book, and she picked up hers, and they sat in the warm comfortable quiet, and neither of them said anything else about it because neither of them needed to. Odin tested him at 9. This was not announced. Odin did not announce things, he arranged them, carefully, so that what he wanted to observe would occur naturally, or naturally enough that the distinction was difficult. Harry came to understand this about him gradually, the way you came to understand the grain of something by working with it over time. Odin was not unkind. He was thorough, which produced a similar effect but a different meaning. The test was simple. Odin asked Harry to come with him to the treasury, which he had done before. Harry had been shown the vault at various points, always with someone else present, always as a demonstration of something specific. This time was just the two of them. Odin walked him through the vault slowly, past the relics and artifacts and things kept in the dark for reasons of power or danger or both, and stopped in front of a specific case. What do you feel from this? He asked, indicating the case without touching it. Harry stood in front of it. It held a flat, dark stone roughly the size of a hand, carved with nothing, just smooth and dark and very, very old. He felt it immediately, something reached back at him, something cold and interested and patient in a way that made his skin move. Wrong, he said. Wrong how? It's looking at me, Harry said. Not the way you look at something. The way you look at something you're going to eat. He stepped slightly back from the case. What is it? A fragment of something older than Asgard, Odin said. Did you want to know if I'd touch it? Odin looked at him. Yes. I wasn't going to touch it, Harry said. It wanted me to, which is exactly why I wouldn't. Odin was quiet. The casket of ancient winters, he said, gesturing to a larger piece further along the vault, wanted no one. What was your reading of that? Tired, Harry said, walking toward it. It's tired of being here and wants to go back somewhere colder and older. He paused in front of it. It's not dangerous. It's just heavy. He paused. Sad, almost. Odin walked the rest of the vault with him, asking occasionally, listening to what Harry felt from each object, and Harry answered honestly because there was no value in doing otherwise and because Odin's opinions interested him, not to seek approval, not exactly, but the same way Loki's thinking interested him, as the output of a mind that had traveled further than most. At the end of the vault, Odin stopped. You read magic by feeling, he said. Is that wrong? Harry asked. It's Freya's gift in you, Odin said, which wasn't quite an answer. Combined with Baldur's clarity. You see the truth of things by their emotional content, what they fear, what they want, what they were made to do. Is that useful? Harry asked. Odin looked at him with the deep, single-eyed regard that had been considering the nature of the cosmos since before human memory. The most important things you will ever face, he said, will not be defeated by strength or cleverness alone. They'll be defeated by someone who can look at them clearly enough to see what they actually are. A pause. Most people are too afraid of what they'll find to look that honestly. I'm not afraid, Harry said. I know, Odin said. That's why I'm telling you. The years moved. They moved the way years did in Asgard, with the particular rhythm of a place that was old enough not to be in a hurry, where the seasons changed and the festivals came and the warriors trained and the ravens circled and the light shifted across the city in the long golden patterns that Harry had first seen from a window in a shirt 3 sizes too large. He grew. Not quickly, he was built slight, like his mother's side of things, and would always be lean in a way that made people underestimate him on first meeting, which Loki had pointed out was tactically excellent and which Thor had pointed out was not an excuse to skip strength training, and both of them were right. He grew into his magic steadily, the way a tree grew, not in visible increments day to day but undeniably when you looked back. The love magic that had lived in him since infancy developed from a passive warmth into something he could direct, shape, use. He could feel the emotional state of anything with a heartbeat within a significant radius. He could transmit calm the way Baldur could transmit light, not by doing anything specifically, but by being present and being himself. He could work active enchantments with a precision that made Freya, who had been doing this for millennia, watch him very carefully. The divine light was Baldur's gift, and it manifested later. Not as something that appeared dramatically, but as something that became visible gradually over his 9th and 10th year, the specific quality of his presence changing, the way people in a room would become aware of him before they'd consciously noticed him. His skin, in certain lights, did something that wasn't quite glow but wasn't quite not. His eyes, which had always been extraordinary in their green, occasionally did something that Frigga described as the truth showing through, which Harry found embarrassing until he found it useful. The invulnerability, his mother's mark, Baldur's blessing, the deep structural protections woven into him by love and divinity both, was a quieter thing, not a party trick but a constant. He fell off a wall at 8, badly, from a height that should have broken bones, and stood up with scraped palms and an annoyed expression. Thor had looked at him, and at the wall, and done a private calculation, and after that pushed him considerably harder in training. By 10 he understood that conventional harm didn't work on him the way it worked on mortals, not with ease, not from ordinary sources, but he also understood, from Baldur's careful quiet teaching, that this was not an excuse for carelessness. Things that could not hurt you could still hurt the people around you. The invulnerability was not armor. It was a foundation. He was 11 when the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday, in the morning, carried by an owl that looked deeply confused about being in Asgard, which was fair. The owl landed on the window of the kitchen where Harry was eating breakfast with the specific posture of a bird that has completed its mission and is unsure whether the laws of nature still applied in this location. Harry looked at it. It looked at him. He took the letter. The envelope was heavy, yellowish parchment, with bright green ink and a wax seal of a badger and a lion and a raven and a snake all arranged around a large H. He turned it over. In the corner, in the same green ink, it said, Mr. H. Potter, the Asgardian Palace, Asgard, the 9 realms. He sat with it for a moment. Freya came in from the hall, took one look at his face, and stopped. What is it? He held it out to her without speaking. She took it. Read the address. Read it again. Put it down on the table with a flat, deliberate motion and stood there looking at it with an expression that Harry, who could read emotional content with divine precision, read as, several things happening simultaneously and none of them comfortable. You knew this might come, he said. I knew it would come eventually, she said. I've been, watching the mortal magical world. Keeping track. She sat down across from him. Open it. He opened it. The letter was formal and polite and said, essentially, Dear Mr. Potter, you have a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and included a supply list and a date. He read it twice, then laid it on the table next to the envelope, and looked at Freya. Hogwarts, he said. It's a magical school, she said. In Scotland. One of the oldest in the mortal world. A pause. It's also sitting on top of a nexus of very old power, which is partly why it's lasted as long as it has. Do I need to go? He asked. No, she said, without hesitation. You don't need anything you don't want. You know that. He nodded. But, she said, and leaned forward. The magic your mother placed in you, the working that saved your life, it's connected to something in the mortal magical world that hasn't finished resolving. I've felt it for years. Something left behind. Something dangerous. She held his gaze. The person who tried to kill you when you were a baby isn't gone, Harry. He's diminished. Reduced. But he's still there, and he's been trying to find a way back. And Hogwarts is where it comes to a head, Harry said. Eventually, she said. The shape of it points there. The magic of the place, your mother's working, the unfinished death that tried to touch you. She paused. I want you to go because I want you to be there when it resolves. I want you to be the one who finishes it. Not because I'm the only one who can. He said, and the question had a slight edge, not anger, just the specific clarity of someone who'd been taught by Loki to hear the shape of a premise before accepting it. Freya smiled, and it was her real smile, not the one for courts or wars or the broad dramatic occasions of divine life, but the close, private one that she gave to very few things. Because you're the right one, she said. And because I trust you, and because you deserve to choose this rather than have it chosen for you. He looked at the letter. At the owl, still on the windowsill, now eating something it had found that probably wasn't meant for it. And because I'll be bored here, he said, which was not quite a joke. That too, Freya agreed. He thought about it. He thought about Privet Drive, which he did sometimes, not with pain but with the specific detachment of someone examining something that had happened to an earlier version of themselves. He thought about the magical world he'd never been part of, the one that had a name for him, that had given him a title before he could walk, that had celebrated over a grave it had dug for a baby and then put him in a cupboard and called it done. He thought about his mother's magic in his chest, warm and constant and unfinished. I'll go, he said. Baldur was in the doorway. Harry hadn't heard him arrive, but that was not unusual. Baldur moved with the quietness of something that didn't need to announce itself. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms folded and his expression giving nothing away, which meant he'd been thinking something for long enough that it had gone beyond expression into stillness. Do you want company? Baldur said. Not at school, Harry said. That would be strange. A pause. But getting there, yes. Baldur nodded. Harry looked at the letter one more time. At the owl, which had finished its unauthorized breakfast and was watching him with the steady, incurious patience of a creature that simply carried things between people and didn't ask questions about what was in them. Harr Baldurson, he said to himself, quietly, the name he'd been given in Asgard, and then, with the specific intention of picking up a thing that had been dropped somewhere and deciding to carry it himself, Harry Potter. He folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and set it on the table with the same flat deliberate motion Freya had used. Not an ending. A beginning that knew what it was. I'll need school supplies, he said. Freya looked at him. You'll need considerably more than school supplies. I know, he said. But start there. He pushed back from the table, tucked the letter into his pocket, and walked out into the Asgardian morning, which was, as always, gold and vast and entirely itself, and behind him Freya and Baldur looked at each other over the kitchen table with the specific expression that parents wore when they recognized that the thing they had made together was ready for something, and were proud of it, and afraid for it, and fiercely, unconditionally certain of it, all at the same time. The owl ruffled its feathers and flew away, back toward Scotland, toward the old school on the old magic, back toward the world that had written a name on an envelope and sent it to Asgard without knowing what it was calling home. Chapter 3, The world that named me. The leaky cauldron smelled like old wood, spilled ale, and something underneath those things that had no mortal name but that Harry's magic read immediately as accumulation, centuries of people carrying hope and worry and ordinary human need through the same door, the residue of it soaked into the bricks the way wood smoke soaked into fabric. He stood in the entrance for a moment, just breathing it, while Freya moved past him toward the bar and Baldur closed the door behind them against the noise of Charing Cross Road. It smells like stories, Harry said. Most old places do, Baldur said. The barman, a bent, smiling man with almost no hair and a general quality of having witnessed everything twice already, looked up when they came in and opened his mouth to say something standard and welcoming, and then he saw Harry, and then he did what people kept doing today, which was stop. Not dramatically. Not falling over or pointing or making a production of it. Just, a stop. A recognition. The eyes moving from the dark hair to the forehead to the green eyes behind the glasses, and then a breath. "Bless me," Tom the barman said softly. "Harry Potter." Harry heard the name land differently in here than it had ever landed in Asgard. In Asgard it was just his name, the mortal half of it, the human anchor he carried alongside Baldurson, the part that connected him to his mother and her working and her choice. In here it had weight. The way a word could have weight when a lot of people had said it a lot of times and not all of them had meant it kindly. "Hello," Harry said, pleasantly, and the pleasantness was genuine. He was almost always genuinely pleasant, which was its own kind of unsettling for people expecting something more manageable. Tom opened and closed his mouth. Around them, the scattered morning customers were doing that thing where they were not staring but were positioned for maximum visibility of not staring. Harry felt their attention like warmth on his skin, not the bad kind, mostly, just the kind that came from a story about yourself that had been living in other people's mouths long before it reached you. Freya turned from the bar with the specific expression she wore when she was deciding how much she cared about any given situation, which today was approximately none. "We need the entrance to Diagon Alley," she said to Tom, whose eyes had moved to her and widened slightly because Freya, regardless of how she was dressed and how mortal she was trying to appear, had the particular quality of someone who should be taken seriously. "Of course," he said. "Right through the back." Diagon Alley opened up behind the brick wall like a secret that had been keeping itself for years and was pleased to have someone to tell. The street unfolded in a sweep of tilted buildings and bright shop fronts and robes and owls and the cheerful anarchic bustle of a place that had its own internal logic and wasn't particularly interested in explaining it to anyone. Harry stepped out of the archway and stopped. He'd been in Asgard. He'd been in Vanaheim, and on the Bifrost, and in Nidavellir once when Freya took him to see the dwarven forges and he had stood in the heat and noise of it and understood something about craftsmanship that he couldn't have gotten from a book. He was not someone who was easily impressed by atmosphere. But this was different. This was his world, or had been, once, before it lost him and forgot to look properly. The magic here was mortal magic, the kind that came from human hands and human will and centuries of human stubborn refusal to live in a world without wonder, and it felt different from Asgardian magic the way a folk song felt different from an orchestra. Smaller in scale. More specific. More personal. "I like it," he said, to nobody in particular. "Don't get sentimental," Freya said. "We have a list." The list, courtesy of Hogwarts, was practical and lengthy. Robes, textbooks, a cauldron, potion ingredients, a wand. They'd deal with the bank first, Freya had decided, and Harry had agreed because Gringotts was the most interesting item on the agenda for reasons that had nothing to do with money. The bank was white marble and imposing in the way that institutions were imposing when they wanted you to feel temporary by comparison. The goblins at the desks moved through their work with the specific efficiency of creatures who had been doing this for so long that impatience was something they'd left behind a long time ago. Harry walked up to the nearest teller, a goblin with a face like weathered stone and eyes like polished copper, and felt immediately that the magic in this place was old, old in a way that the shop fronts weren't, old in the way that Asgardian things were old, as if it had been put here before the building and the building had grown up around it. "Harry Potter," he said. "I'd like to access my vault." The goblin looked at him. Goblins had a particular quality to their attention. It wasn't the human version, which assessed and sorted, it was the version that weighed. This one weighed him now, and Harry let it, standing still and present the way Baldur had taught him. "Identification," the goblin said. Harry pressed his hand to the counter, let a thread of his magic come through, not deliberately, just the natural pulse of it, the love-light warmth, and the goblin's copper eyes sharpened by approximately 1 degree. "There is," the goblin said, "considerably more in that vault than gold." "I know," Harry said, though he didn't, quite, and was very interested to find out. Freya, who was standing at his shoulder and who absolutely knew more than she was saying, kept her expression neutral. The cart ride down was fast and cold and exactly as good as Harry had hoped. He held the rail and let the wind hit his face and felt the deep, ancient magic of the vault tunnels move around him like groundwater, old and dark and completely disinterested in impressing anyone. He liked it for that. The goblins built things that worked and didn't decorate the working with performance, which had a kind of honesty to it. The vault, when they reached it, opened to his touch and exhaled cool air and the particular smell of metal and old paper and something underneath it, something that Freya's magic recognized before Harry's did, and he felt her stiffen slightly beside him. He stepped inside. There was gold, yes, more than he'd have known what to do with if Frigga hadn't spent years teaching him the relative value of things across the 9 realms, which made mortal gold look like a pleasant local custom. But there were also 2 locked boxes, a folded piece of parchment in a protective case, and a small wrapped package that had his name on it in a woman's handwriting he didn't recognize, though he recognized the quality of the magic it was wrapped in. His mother's. He stood in front of it for a long moment, and the vault was very quiet except for Freya breathing behind him, and he felt the warmth in his chest do something it did when something important was very close. Not today, he said. Not to Freya. To himself, to the thing he felt. A decision about timing. I'll come back for this. He took a handful of gold without counting it, because he understood the general principle, and walked out. Madame Malkin's was efficient and mildly chaotic. The robes measured themselves, which Harry watched with professional interest, and Madame Malkin hummed and pinned and said "Hold still dear" twice without looking up. There was another boy there, blonde, with the posture of someone who had been told their whole life that their posture was important, and the expression of someone who considered most situations from a mild altitude above them. Hogwarts, the boy said. Yes, Harry said. First year. Yes. The boy looked at him with the measuring quality of someone whose measuring had been calibrated by people with opinions. I'm Draco Malfoy, he said. Not loudly, not performing it, just stating it, the way you stated something you assumed everyone already knew. Harry felt the magic coming off him and read it the way he read everything: old family, old power, old pride. Underneath that, tucked away where manners and training had put it, something that was not quite as certain as the surface presented. He considered the architecture of it the way Loki had taught him to consider things. Harry, he said. Potter. The silence in the shop did the thing it kept doing today. Madame Malkin's pin stopped mid-movement. Draco Malfoy's perfectly calibrated expression did something it probably wasn't supposed to do, which was become briefly, genuinely surprised. Potter, Draco said, recovering quickly. I've heard about you. I've heard nothing about you, Harry said, pleasantly. That seems like something to fix. Draco blinked. He'd clearly been prepared for several responses: awe, nervousness, social awkwardness, and this was not in the catalogue. He recalibrated with the speed of someone who'd been taught to recalibrate. My father says Hogwarts is going to be interesting this year, he said, testing. Your father would know about that? Harry said. A slight pause. He knows most things worth knowing, Draco said, which was the answer of someone who'd absorbed an opinion rather than formed one. Harry said, which was what he'd learned from Loki to say when someone told you something that was probably not quite true but that they believed, and which communicated noted without committing to agreement. Draco looked at him. Harry looked back with the easy, untroubled gaze of someone who was comfortable with being looked at and had absolutely nothing to prove. It was, he'd found, the most destabilizing thing you could do. Draco, to his credit, recovered. Are you coming to school alone? My family came with me to the alley, Harry said. Hogwarts I'm doing alone. Where's your family from? Abroad, Harry said. He thought about Draco after, walking through the alley with bags over his shoulder while Freya browsed the potion ingredient stalls with the critical focus of an expert encountering someone else's work. He thought about the calibrated surface and the less certain underneath, the pride and the nervousness both real, the father's opinions worn like a coat that didn't quite fit anymore because the person inside had grown in a direction the coat didn't account for. Something to watch, Loki's voice said, in the part of Harry's mind where good advice lived. Not someone to write off. Ollivanders was last on the list, and Harry had the feeling, walking through the door into the narrow, dusty silence of it, that this was going to be interesting in a way the rest of the day hadn't been. The wand maker appeared from between the shelves, a small, pale man with enormous silver eyes that had the specific quality of seeing things at a resolution most people didn't have access to, and which focused on Harry with an intensity that was completely without social courtesy, the focus of someone for whom social courtesy had simply never been a priority compared to the thing they were actually looking at. Harry Potter, Ollivander said, and said the name the way Heimdall had said it, with weight, with something that was older than the moment. Mr. Ollivander, Harry said. I wondered when I'd see you, Ollivander said. He moved back between the shelves and boxes began floating toward him. Your mother's wand, willow, 10 1/4, swishy, excellent for charms. Sold her herself. And your father's, mahogany, 11, pliable, excellent for transfiguration. Also mine. He set several boxes on the counter. Both remarkable wands for remarkable people. A pause, pulling him into focus. But you're not either of them. No, Harry agreed. And you're not quite what I expected either. Ollivander circled him slowly, silver eyes moving over him with that precise, resolution-maxed focus, and Harry stood still and let him, because there was nothing threatening here, just a craftsman reading his material. The light, Ollivander said, half to himself. Something's done something to the light in you. He stopped in front of him. Hold out your hand. Harry held out his right hand. Ollivander placed a wand across his palm, 9 inches, rigid, with the smell of smoke and old resin, and it did nothing, and Harry set it down politely. Ollivander tried 7 more. Nothing fit, not the way he suspected a fitting should feel. He knew what resonance was. He knew what it felt like when something matched something else at a fundamental level, and none of these were that. Interesting, Ollivander said, which in his voice meant unusual and therefore captivating. He disappeared between the shelves again, and was gone for several minutes, during which Harry stood in the dimness and listened to the quiet. The wands on their shelves had a presence, he could feel them, each one carrying the signature of its core, its wood, its maker's intention. The room was like a library where all the books were alive. When Ollivander came back he was carrying 1 box and his expression had changed, not excited, not dramatic, but with the specific quality of a craftsman presenting something they'd been waiting to see used. This, he said, I made 12 years ago. I made it not knowing who it was for, only knowing that whatever it was for would be considerable. He opened the box. The wand was 11 inches, made of holly, pale, almost white along the grain, with a phoenix feather core, and when Harry picked it up the warmth in his chest responded to the warmth of it with the specific resonance he'd been waiting for. Not explosively. Not with showers of sparks and theatrical satisfaction. Just, a settling. A rightness. A key in the lock it was made for, except this time the lock had been him and the key had been waiting on a shelf in London for 12 years. The light that came off it, briefly, was gold. Ollivander stared at it. The brother wand, he said, very quietly. Of what? Harry asked. The wand that killed your parents, Ollivander said. And failed to kill you. He looked at Harry with those silver eyes at full resolution. The core feathers came from the same phoenix. The only 2 he ever gave. Harry held the wand. He felt the connection Ollivander was describing, could feel it, faintly, like a thread that went somewhere cold and dark and quiet, a thing that was diminished and distant but present. He felt it, and he noted it, and he did not find it frightening. What does that mean? He asked. Practically. Ollivander blinked. He had expected, Harry thought, a more dramatic reaction. It means, the wand maker said, carefully, that when you and he meet, and you will meet, Mr. Potter, the magic between these wands ensures it, something unusual will happen. I'm generally fine with unusual, Harry said. Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. Yes, he said, slowly. I think you probably are. On the way back through Diagon Alley, Harry found the other two. He found Hermione first, or rather, walked into the back of her while she stood in the entrance to Flourish and Blots reading the back of a copy of the Standard Book of Spells Grade 1 with the absolute focused attention of someone who had forgotten they were standing in a doorway. He put a hand out to catch his bag before it spilled, and she spun around with the reflexive guilt of someone who'd been told before about the doorway issue. Sorry, she said, very quickly. I was reading. I do that. Sorry. I noticed, Harry said. The book any good? She blinked at him. She was brown-skinned, with dark curly hair attempting escape from where it had been put, and eyes that were doing rapid evaluation in a way that was almost low-key-ish in its velocity. It's all right, she said, with the tone of someone who found it mildly disappointing but was being polite. The charms section is very surface level. The theory isn't there. What theory is missing? She stared at him. Most people, her expression suggested, didn't ask follow-up questions about textbook theory. The why, she said. It tells you what to do but not why any of it works. Magic must have an underlying structure. It can't just be arbitrary. It's not arbitrary, Harry said. Most mortal magical theory breaks down at the level of intention and emotion, which is where the actual mechanics are. She stared at him. She stopped. Who told you that? I grew up somewhere with different magical traditions, he said. I'm Harry, by the way. Harry Potter. She did the same thing everyone else had done, except that for her the pause was followed not by awe but by the rapid internal reorganization of someone who just had a data category update. She looked at his forehead, because everyone did, then looked back at his eyes. You're real, she said. I wasn't sure you'd be real. Some of the accounts seemed, I'm Hermione Granger. Muggleborn, he said, because he'd read enough of the magical world to recognize the specific way she held the textbook, with the commitment of someone who discovered an entire country they hadn't known existed and was determined to learn all of it. Yes, she said, with a slight edge to it, the edge of someone who'd had the fact used against them. Good, Harry said. Good, she said. Fresh eyes, he said. You'll see things the rest of them have been taught not to notice. She looked at him for 3 full seconds. I think, she said, carefully, that you're going to be either fascinating or very irritating. Both, probably, Harry said. Are you getting that book? It's on the list, she said. Get the Flitwick Charms Theory volume from the 3rd shelf as well, he said. It's not on the list but it's considerably better. She looked at him. She looked at the shelf. She went and got the Flitwick volume. He found Neville in the apothecary, which seemed right, standing near the plant ingredients with the specific posture of someone whose element he'd accidentally walked into and who was trying not to let anyone notice that they knew things. He was round-faced and soft-spoken and had a toad under one arm and was quietly, accurately identifying each ingredient he passed by its properties, under his breath, thinking nobody could hear. Harry could hear. He stopped beside him. The valerian's going dry, he said, indicating the batch on the shelf, which looked perfect to the naked eye but that Harry's magic read as old and partially inert. Neville looked up with the expression of someone caught doing something embarrassing, then looked at the valerian. You can tell that, he said. The magic's going out of it, Harry said. The color's right but it feels hollow. Neville stared at it. He reached out and held his hand near it, not touching, and Harry watched him feel for it, and he could feel the kid feeling for it, could sense the magic in him reaching out in an unpolished, uncertain way, like someone trying to play a song they knew but hadn't practiced. You're right, Neville said, surprised at himself. You knew, Harry said. You just didn't trust it. Neville blinked. How did you? You were already moving past it when you identified it out loud, Harry said. Your hand said it was off before your voice caught up. Neville looked at him with an expression that was complicated in the way that compliments were complicated for people who hadn't received many. "I'm Neville Longbottom," he said. "Harry Potter." Neville's eyes went wide, then, unlike most people, immediately came back to regular size, and he said, "Oh. Is it all right that I don't make a thing of that?" Harry smiled, the real one, lopsided and warm and entirely genuine. "It's better than all right," he said. "What kind of herbological work are you interested in?" And Neville, who had probably not been asked that specific question by anyone before, began to talk, and Harry listened with real attention, and by the time they left the apothecary they'd been talking for 20 minutes and Neville had mentioned his grandmother 4 times with the mix of love and anxiety that told Harry everything relevant about that dynamic without a word of direct explanation. Freya was waiting outside with the bags, watching him with an expression he recognized, the one she wore when she was witnessing something that confirmed a thing she'd already decided. Baldur was beside her, looking at the alley with the particular quality of his attention that meant he was reading the magical environment the way Harry read people. "Friends?" Freya asked. "Possibly," Harry said. "Too early to be certain." "You liked them," she said. "Yes," he agreed, because there was no point in denying it. She looked at him for a moment. "The alley has been talking since the minute you walked in. Tom sent a message ahead. By tonight, the whole magical world will know you're here." "Good," Harry said. She tilted her head. "They've been telling a story about me for 10 years, he said. "The version where I'm a symbol. Something that happened to someone." He looked down the alley, at the shops and the owls and the people who were still, even now, occasionally stopping to look. "I'd rather they start telling the version where I'm a person." Baldur looked at him. "And if they don't want to?" "Then I'll be a person loudly until the story changes," Harry said. Freya made a small, fierce sound that was satisfaction. Baldur nodded once, which was his version of the same thing. The Hogwarts Express left from King's Cross Station on the 1st of September, and Platform 9 3/4 existed in that interesting state of things that were obvious once you knew to look for them and genuinely invisible until you did. Harry walked through the barrier without hesitation because he could feel the magic in the wall before he reached it, the old misdirection enchantment, clever mortal work, the kind that redirected attention rather than creating a physical barrier. The platform was controlled chaos. Steam and trunks and owls and cats and parents with the specific look of people trying to hold on to something that was walking away from them. He found it moving in a way that surprised him, not sad, but tender, because love at the moment of letting go had a particular quality he recognized and honored. He found a compartment easily, because he wasn't fighting the crowd so much as moving with its grain. Neville appeared 5 minutes later, toad in hand, and took the seat across from him without ceremony, which Harry appreciated. Hermione arrived shortly after, settled herself with 3 books and organized her space with the efficiency of someone for whom organization was deeply felt rather than merely useful. They were moving when Ron appeared, red-haired, freckled, with the look of someone who had just been running and hadn't expected to make it. He slid into the compartment, caught his breath, looked at the other 3, and said, "Sorry. Is it all right if my brothers took all the others?" "Sit down," Harry said. "I'm Harry." "Ron Weasley," said Ron, dropping into the empty seat, and then doing the double take, which this time was more dramatic because Ron had older brothers who had very strong opinions. Yes, Harry said. "Is that going to be a problem?" Ron stared at him. "No," he said. "It's just, you look normal. What did you expect?" Harry said, genuinely interested. "I dunno," Ron said. "Taller?" "More, I don't know, there's stories. There are definitely stories," Harry agreed. "Most of them wrong." Ron processed this. He was open-faced, Harry noticed, in a way that was unusual. Most people managed their expressions out of habit, and Ron apparently hadn't gotten around to it. Whatever he felt moved directly into his face without much delay, which made him honest in a way that Loki would have called a tactical weakness and Harry thought was actually a kind of strength. "Where are you from?" Ron asked. The stories say you were living with muggles, but you can't have been, you know too much already. I grew up abroad, Harry said. Where abroad? A long way north, Harry said, which was technically accurate. Ron accepted this in the way of someone who'd grown up in a large family, where follow-up questions were a limited resource and you allocated them carefully. He pulled out a slightly squashed cheese sandwich, looked at Harry, and offered half. Harry took it, because it was offered with complete uncomplicated generosity, the kind that didn't calculate what it would get back, and that kind of gesture tended to tell you the most important thing about a person. He ate the sandwich. Ron told him about Hogwarts with the enthusiasm of someone whose entire family had gone before him, which meant he knew a great deal and half of it had been editorially shaped by siblings, and Harry listened to the real information and quietly catalogued the embellishments. Hermione occasionally corrected Ron from behind a book, and Ron occasionally looked like he was going to object and then looked at the book and thought better of it. Neville fed his toad something from a small box and listened to all of it with the relaxed attention of someone comfortable being peripheral to a conversation. They were somewhere past Birmingham when Harry felt it. A cold thread. The same thing he'd felt in Ollivanders, from the wand, that distant, diminished presence that connected to the connection. But this was different. This was closer. This was in the train. He didn't move visibly. He let the conversation continue. Ron was telling a story about his brother Fred, and he reached out with his magic the way Freya had taught him, quiet and warm and non-threatening, like putting your hand into dark water to find out what was in it. The back of the train. A compartment 3 or 4 down. And the cold thing wasn't in someone, not exactly, it was on someone, sitting on the surface of them the way a bad smell sat on fabric, the magic of something diminished and desperate that had found a host it could cling to. Harry felt the shape of it. Felt the reaching quality of it, the desperate hungry diminishment of something that had expected to die and hadn't, that was looking for a way back to something it had been and couldn't reach alone. He set this information exactly where Loki had taught him to put things he needed to act on later, not away, not ignored, but held, present and accessible without dominating the now. "Are you all right?" Hermione said, and he realized she'd been watching him with the specific attention of someone who noticed when people went briefly elsewhere. "Fine," he said. "Thinking." "About what?" she said. "The castle," he said, which was true, just not the whole of it. "I want to know what it feels like." "Old," Neville said, surprisingly, and then looked slightly startled at his own contribution. "It feels old. My gran says you can feel it before you see it. Like the ground knows it's there." Harry looked at him. "That's exactly right," he said. Neville looked quietly pleased in the way of someone not accustomed to being exactly right, and the train rolled north through the green September dark, carrying 4 children and 1 young god toward a castle that had been waiting, in its patient old way, for all of them. The boats across the Black Lake were Hagrid's domain, and Hagrid was enormous and warm in the way that certain large things were warm, not delicate about it, not careful, just radiantly, authentically present. He stood at the shore calling Fur's years with the booming good nature of someone who loved this part and never got tired of loving it, and Harry liked him immediately and completely, the way you liked certain weather, not because it was subtle but because it was exactly what it was. Harry got in a boat with Neville, and the lake was still and black and reflected the sky and the approaching castle, and when the castle came into view around the cliff edge he heard the first years around him go quiet in the specific way you went quiet when something was too large for noise. It was enormous. It was layered, built across centuries by hands that had added and adapted and never quite agreed on an aesthetic, so that it grew organically rather than planned, full of the accumulated intention of every person who had ever built something into it. It was lit from within and the light spilled out across the lake's surface and the towers rose against the star-thick sky and underneath all of it, underneath the stone and the centuries and the mortal magic layered into every corridor, Harry felt the deep old power that Freya had told him about. The Nexus. The thing the castle had been built on top of, or possibly around, or possibly because of, the ancient power in the ground that had called a school here the way certain trees called lightning. He felt it reach. Not for him specifically. Just respond. The way a fire responded to more air. His chest warmed. Neville, beside him, let out a slow breath. "There it is," he said softly. "There it is," Harry said. The boats moved across the water and behind them the dark lake was still and the stars were many and the castle waited with the patience of something that had been waiting since before any of them were born and would be waiting long after. Harry put his hand in the water briefly, feeling the old magic in it, and something moved deep below, not threatening, just acknowledging, the way a very old thing acknowledged the presence of another very old thing, the polite mutual recognition of power that understood power. He took his hand out. Dried it on his robe. Hermione, in the boat behind him, was watching with her eyes extremely wide, and he knew she'd seen something she didn't have a category for yet. "I'll explain later," he said, quietly. "Yes," she said, very firmly. "You will." The boats touched the shore, and Hagrid led them up through the passage carved into the rock, and ahead the great doors of Hogwarts stood open, and warm light came out of them into the cool September night like a welcome that had been prepared a very long time ago and was finally being collected. Harry Potter walked through the doors of Hogwarts, and the castle recognized him, and the warmth in his chest met the warmth in the stones, and somewhere very deep beneath both of them the oldest magic stirred. The world that had named him finally had him. He just wasn't quite what it thought it had named. Chapter 4, What the Castle Remembers. The Sorting Hat sang its song and Harry listened from the middle of the line with his hands in his robe pockets and the specific quality of attention he gave to things that were older than they looked. The hat was 1,000 years old and conscious in the way that objects became conscious when enough human intention had been poured into them over enough time, not a person, but not nothing either. A distillation. The accumulated wisdom of 4 founders who had disagreed about almost everything except that the disagreement was worth having. He felt it notice him before he reached the stool. Not a reaching, not a testing, just a pause in the general ambient quality of the hat's presence. The same thing that happened with Heimdall, with the old magic in the Gringotts vaults, with the lake. Recognition moving through something old and making it briefly, completely still. The hall was enormous and beautiful and full of candles suspended in air above long tables where older students watched the first years file in with expressions ranging from genuine warmth to the cultivated detachment of people who had forgotten they'd done this themselves. Harry looked at the enchanted ceiling, a perfect mirror of the night sky outside, moving, alive, the stars exactly where they were supposed to be, and felt the familiar comfort of a familiar sky. Frigga had taught him every constellation, the Norse names and the Greek names and the names the dwarves had for them, and seeing them here felt like being greeted by old acquaintances. Granger, Hermione. Hermione walked to the stool with the stride of someone who had decided to treat this like an examination she'd prepared for, which was both accurate and slightly missing the point, but was entirely her. The hat dropped over her eyes, considered for about 4 seconds, and shouted Gryffindor with what Harry read as genuine enthusiasm. Not just the right answer but the right answer delivered with feeling. Hermione went to the Gryffindor table with her back straight and sat down and immediately looked for Harry. Longbottom, Neville. Neville went up holding his toad, which Harry thought was perfect, and sat very still under the hat for almost a minute, long enough that Harry felt him working through something underneath the brim, some interior negotiation happening in the dark. When the hat finally called Gryffindor, Neville got up with an expression that was quiet and complicated, and Harry thought, the hat gave him a choice and he made it. He stored this. Malfoy, Draco. The hat touched Draco's head and called Slytherin before it had fully settled, the fastest sorting Harry had seen so far. Draco walked to the Slytherin table with his chin up and Harry watched him sit down and be greeted by his housemates with the specific warmth of people who'd been expecting him, which was comfortable and suffocating in equal measure. Potter, Harry. The hall went very quiet. He walked to the stool with the same easy pace he used for everything, not performing calm, just actually calm, which he found was often more unsettling for onlookers than nerves would have been. He sat down. The hat dropped over his eyes. The dark was immediate and total, and then the hat spoke, and it spoke directly into the center of his mind in the way that anything conscious enough communicated when it meant business. Well, it said. That's unusual. Is it? Harry thought back. You're not entirely mortal, the hat said. I've sat on a great many heads over 1,000 years, boy. I know the feel of a human mind. You're human, yes, but something else has been added. A pause. Several somethings. Does that change anything? Harry said. It changes the sorting considerably, the hat said, and sounded interested rather than troubled. I sort by character. Bravery for Gryffindor, loyalty for Hufflepuff, wisdom for Ravenclaw, ambition for Slytherin. But you're, all of it, aren't you? And none of it's shallow. This isn't someone who could go anywhere. This is someone who has become several things simultaneously. Another pause. You'd be remarkable in any house. Which means the question isn't capability. It's purpose. What do you mean? Harry said. Why are you here? The hat said. Not unkindly. Like a genuine question. Harry considered it, the real answer, not the surface one. Not because Freya sent me or because of my mother's magic or because of what's hidden in this castle. The answer underneath those. Because the people in this room deserve someone who'll stand in front of things that want to hurt them, he thought, and it was true, had always been true, was the thing Freya's magic in him had always been oriented toward. Because love without action is just feeling. And I'm very good at action. The hat was quiet for a moment. When it spoke again there was something in it that Harry thought, if hats could feel things, might have been something close to moved. Gryffindor, it said, and then, more quietly, just for him, though you would have been the making of any of them. Gryffindor, it shouted to the hall. The Gryffindor table erupted, loudly, the way Gryffindors did everything, with complete commitment and no consideration of volume. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to the tall witch with the pointed hat who'd been managing the stool, Professor McGonagall, he'd remembered from Hermione's extensive preschool research, and walked to the table. Hermione was applauding with feeling. Neville was grinning. Ron, who had been sorted just before Neville, pointed at the seat he'd saved with the proprietary confidence of someone making a gift of a thing he'd decided was his to give. Harry sat down. The feast appeared, and the conversation broke open like water finding level, and the hall was warm and loud and full of the ordinary magical noise of several hundred children being hungry and happy and young, and Harry sat in the middle of it and felt it all, the overlapping emotional textures, the excitement and anxiety and relief, the homesickness already blooming in some of the younger faces, the contentment of the older students comfortable in their place, and it was overwhelming in the most pleasant possible way. The way standing in a full hearth was overwhelming, too warm to be comfortable but impossible to want to leave. He ate a great deal, because Asgardian habits ran to large meals. You eat like Thor, Hermione observed, with the tone of someone whose benchmark for eating was considerably more moderate. I've been told that, Harry said. She stared at him. That was meant to be a Thor is a myth joke. I know, Harry said, and ate another bread roll. The castle revealed itself over the first week in the way that old places revealed themselves, not all at once but incrementally, through the accumulation of small discoveries. Harry spent the first 3 mornings walking corridors before anyone else was awake because the castle was most itself before the students filled it, when the torches were low and the portraits were drowsy and the stones had the particular quality of old things at rest. He could feel the structure of it. Not metaphorically, literally, the way he felt emotional content in people, he could feel the intentionality baked into Hogwarts architecture. Rooms that had been built for protection hummed at a frequency different from rooms built for learning, which hummed differently from rooms built for ceremony. The 7th floor had something odd about it, a wall that felt more alive than the walls around it, something behind it that responded to intention in a way that reminded him of Vanaheim, of places where the boundary between will and reality was thinner than usual. He filed this away. The 3rd floor corridor felt wrong. He found it on the 4th morning. Walked the length of it and stopped in front of the locked door at the end, and stood in the corridor's pre-dawn quiet and felt what was behind the door and felt what was behind the door and stood very still with it for several minutes. Something was in there. Something that had been put there deliberately, hidden inside something dangerous, and the deliberateness of the hiding had a specific quality. It was careful and complex and had been done by someone who thought in many layers at once, someone for whom a trap was not a single thing but a system. The magic of the thing hidden was old. Different old from the castle's old, not organic, not accumulated. Made. Something made very specifically to do something very specific, and whatever it was it had the quality of a thing that could change the nature of things it touched. He turned around and walked back down the corridor without touching the door. In the great hall over breakfast, while Hermione tested him on the wand movements for Wingardium Leviosa, she'd been delighted to discover he was better at theory than most students twice his age and was rapidly adjusting her calibration of what better at theory meant. Harry thought about the corridor. About the deliberateness. About the person who'd put that system together and the kind of mind required to do it. He thought about Dumbledore, who he hadn't spoken to yet, who sat at the center of the high table at meals with the specific quality of a man occupying the center of things he'd arranged to have arranged around him. Freya had briefed him on Dumbledore. Frigga had added to the briefing in the careful way she added to things, not changing the substance but adding texture, the way you added depth to a painting by adjusting the light source. Loki had listened to the description of Dumbledore's history and methods and said, with genuine professional admiration, that is a man who has never stopped playing a game he started playing 60 years ago and is genuinely incapable of recognizing when the game has changed. Harry watched Dumbledore over the course of the week the way he watched everything, with patient, open, non-threatening attention. He watched him watch the students and the staff and the hall, and what he saw was exactly what Loki had predicted, a chess player. Always assessing. Always calculating the board several moves forward. Not cruel, the calculating wasn't cruel, it came from a genuine belief that his was the mind most equipped to see the whole board, and that someone had to. But it was calculating, and it didn't always account for the piece that wasn't playing the game it expected. He also watched Quirrell, and Quirrell was a different matter entirely. Professor Quirinus Quirrell taught defense against the dark arts with the desperate enthusiasm of a man trying very hard to seem like something he had recently stopped being. He stuttered, which was real. Harry could feel the truth of anxiety in it, but the anxiety had two layers, and the underneath one was not social nervousness. It was the anxiety of someone managing something that required constant management, something that needed to be kept in, kept quiet, kept from showing. The cold thread Harry had felt on the train was here, in this classroom, on this man. Not metaphorically. Literally, the diminished, reaching, hungry thing was present in Quirrell's magic the way a bruise was present in tissue, a damage that had changed the structure around it. Harry sat through the first defense lesson watching Quirrell fumble a demonstration of a basic ward and reading the magical truth of him with the complete focus of someone who had been taught that what was underneath a thing was always more important than what was on top. "Are you paying attention, Mr. Potter?" Quirrell asked, catching Harry's gaze from across the room. "Yes, Professor," Harry said. He held Quirrell's eye for a moment, not challengingly, just with the same clear, present, comfortable gaze he gave everything, and watched Quirrell look away first. Watched something in Quirrell's expression do a thing it shouldn't have, something that was not the professor's expression at all, something underneath it briefly looking out. Cold, and ancient, and very, very interested. Harry smiled pleasantly and took a note. After class, walking back through the corridor with Hermione beside him, she said quietly, "Something is wrong with Quirrell." Harry glanced at her. "Yes. You know what it is?" "I have a theory," he said. She waited. He said nothing else. She made a frustrated sound. "You're going to let me figure it out myself," she said. "You'll get there," he said. "You've got almost everything you need." "That's both helpful and maddening," she said. "Welcome to the way Loki taught me," he said, and she gave him the look she was rapidly developing for references she didn't have context for, and he smiled and walked on. Snape happened in the second week, in the way that Snape happened, entirely, without warning, with the specific quality of something that had been building pressure in a contained space for a long time and was relieved to have found a valve. Potions class was in the dungeons, which the castle's magic felt different in, cooler, older, closer to the bedrock where the nexus was strongest. Harry noticed this and found it interesting. He sat with Neville, because Neville's herbological instincts translated unexpectedly well to potion ingredients. He could identify anything plant-based by touch, which was a significant advantage, and Harry was genuinely enjoying the work, which was chemistry in the way that all the best kinds of magic were chemistry, exact, consequential, dependent on understanding what you were actually doing rather than following steps. Snape entered the dungeon with the velocity of a man whose presence was his first pedagogical tool. He moved to the front, turned, and his eyes moved across the class with the specific scanning quality of someone looking for the target they already know is there. "Potter," he said. Not a greeting. More like the announcement of a position. "Professor," Harry said, in the same register. "Even." "Present." Something shifted in Snape's expression, not dramatically, just the slight recalibration of someone expecting a flinch and not getting one. "Our new celebrity," Snape said, and the tone of it was a tool, precisely calibrated for a specific purpose, making the person in the target position feel small and obvious and out of place. Harry looked at him with the comfortable, uncrowded gaze that came from growing up in a hall full of gods, and said nothing. Snape began his lecture, which was brilliant. Harry recognized this immediately and without reservation, because Snape's understanding of potion theory was genuinely exceptional, the kind that came from real comprehension rather than learned procedure. And Harry had been taught by people who had been doing magic since before humanity had developed written language, and he could recognize the difference between competence and mastery. Snape was a master. This didn't make the next part less interesting. "Potter," Snape said, mid-lecture, with the specific timing of someone who'd been waiting for the right moment. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry looked up from his notes. He thought about it, not performing the thinking, actually doing it, because the question was genuinely interesting. "Draught of living death," he said. "Though the order of combination matters, the asphodel needs to be added to the wormwood reduction rather than the reverse. If you invert the process, the reaction produces a sedative instead of true magical suspension." Silence. Snape looked at him for a moment. "Where the bezoar is found," he said, moving the test. "Stomach of a goat," Harry said. "Acts as an antidote to most poisons by absorbing the magical compound before it integrates with the subject's own magical field. Limited effectiveness against purely organic poisons with no magical component." Another pause. "The difference," Snape said, very carefully, "between monkshood and wolfsbane." "Same plant," Harry said. "Different names for Aconitum napellus. Monkshood in Muggle herbology, wolfsbane in magical tradition, because it was historically used in werewolf-related preparations. The distinction between them is cultural, not botanical." He paused. "Though the method of preparation differs based on which tradition you're working in, because the magical intention shapes the outcome even when the base material is identical. The belief that you're working with wolfsbane produces different magical properties from the belief that you're working with monkshood, even though they're the same plant." The dungeon was very quiet. Hermione, across the room, was looking at him with an expression that was oscillating rapidly between delighted and deeply threatened. Snape's expression had done several things in sequence, all of them controlled but not quite controlled enough. There was the professional surprise of a teacher encountering a student who had exceeded the frame of a gotcha question. There was something older and more complex, something that flickered when he said the word Potter, a grief and a resentment so completely intertwined they'd grown into a single shape. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, which clearly cost him something. "Though I would suggest, Mr. Potter, that knowing the theory and executing the practice are different skills. Theory without application is just vocabulary." "Agreed," Harry said, pleasantly. "I'll show you the application." He did. His boil cure potion was exactly correct, not adequate, not close, exactly correct, and Neville's, working from Harry's verbal guidance, was substantially better than it would otherwise have been, which Snape noted with an expression like a man who had found evidence against his own argument and was deciding whether to suppress it. He didn't take house points. He also didn't give any more. He moved on. After class, in the corridor, Ron fell into step beside Harry and said, "How do you know all of that?" "I read," Harry said. "Nobody reads that much," Ron said. "You haven't met Hermione properly yet," Harry said, and Hermione, on his other side, made a sound that was clearly not a laugh but was adjacent to one. Dumbledore called him to his office in the 4th week. The invitation came through McGonagall, who delivered it with the professional neutrality of someone who had been asked to do something and was doing it without editorially commenting, though Harry could feel the mild curiosity behind the professionalism. He went on a Thursday evening, up the spiral staircase behind the gargoyle that sprang aside for the password, and knocked on the door. "Come in, Harry." The office was extraordinary, not because it was large, but because it was dense. Every surface held something interesting, something that wanted to be looked at. But the interesting things were arranged, Harry noticed immediately, with the specific arrangement of a room that was designed to do something to the person who entered it. The accumulated wonder was not incidental. It was a setting. It made people feel small and curious and like they'd walked into the presence of someone who operated at a different scale. Harry looked at it all with genuine appreciation and sat down in the offered chair. Dumbledore was behind the desk with his hands folded and his expression warm in the way of a fire that had been built to be welcoming, and Harry liked the warmth and acknowledged it and also noted the careful construction of it. "I hope Hogwarts has been treating you well," Dumbledore said. "Very well," Harry said. "The castle is remarkable." "It is," Dumbledore agreed, with the sincerity of someone who meant it while also meaning something adjacent to it. "I must confess, Harry, that I had expected to meet you before this. I had arrangements in place, with your aunt and uncle, that meant I knew where you were, and when I found you were no longer there," a gentle pause, with a weight in it that was more than casual, "I was concerned." "I'm sorry for worrying you," Harry said, which was polite and true and did not include any apology for the actual circumstance. "Where have you been?" Dumbledore asked. The warmth was still there, but the question had a structure under it, not just curiosity, a shape of need. "Abroad," Harry said. "With family." "Your aunt and uncle are your only living family," Dumbledore said. "Biologically," Harry said. "But family isn't always biology." Dumbledore's eyes, which were blue and had the specific quality of someone who used them as instruments, moved over Harry with the assessment he probably used on everyone and that most people probably didn't notice. Harry let him look. "You've been well educated," Dumbledore said. "Academically. Your professors have mentioned you." "What have they said?" Harry said. "That you are, considerably more than expected," Dumbledore said, which was not the answer of someone repeating a professor's exact words but of someone summarizing a pattern. "May I ask what tradition your education has been in?" "Not a British magical tradition," Harry said. "No," Dumbledore agreed, with the tone of someone confirming something they'd already assessed. "It shows in your approach to theory. Very foundational. You work from principles rather than procedure." He tilted his head. "Unusual for someone who has presumably been away from formal magical education." Harry looked at him. At the blue eyes and the warm expression and the patient, constructed atmosphere of the office. He considered Loki's voice in his memory, the chess thinking, the why do they want it and what does that tell me about what they'll do next. He considered what Dumbledore wanted from this conversation, and what he saw was not manipulation in the cruel sense, not control for its own sake, but the movement of a man repositioning a piece he'd misplaced, trying to understand what he was working with now that the piece had come back different. "I know about the 3rd-floor corridor," Harry said. The warmth in the room didn't disappear, but it adjusted. "Do you?" Dumbledore said. "I felt the Nexus magic when I arrived," Harry said. "The hidden object is drawing on it, or being protected by it, or both. The layers of protection around it are impressive. I haven't gone past the door but I can feel the system from outside it." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "Somebody wants it found. Whoever is coming for it, they're expected to go through those challenges. The challenges aren't just protection, they're also a test. The quality of Dumbledore's silence was the most information-dense silence Harry had encountered from a human being. "What are you, Harry?" Dumbledore said, quietly. Not unkindly. With genuine, undisguised wonder, which was the most honest thing he'd said in the whole conversation. "Myself," Harry said. "Mostly." He let the corner of his mouth move. "With some additions." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "The scar," he said. "The connection," Harry said. "Yes. I know. And you're not troubled by it?" "I can feel it," Harry said. "The thing on the other end of it. It's in this castle. In Quirrell." He watched Dumbledore's expression with the same attention he gave everything. "You know that." Dumbledore said nothing. "You put the stone here," Harry said, "because you expected him to come for it. The protections are yours, some of them, the last one at least. You want to be there when he comes, or you want someone to be there." A pause. "You thought that someone would be me." "I thought it might come to you eventually," Dumbledore said. "I didn't expect you to identify it in 4 weeks." "I wasn't supposed to be in the dark for very long," Harry said, mildly. "No," Dumbledore said. "I suppose not." He was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet he was doing something Harry recognized, something he'd seen Odin do, which was revising a strategy in real time without showing the revision. "May I ask what you intend to do?" "Wait," Harry said. "Watch. Let it develop to where it needs to develop." He felt the shape of the thing in his chest, his mother's magic, the connection, the cold thread in Quirrell's presence, and felt the rightness of patience. "It isn't ready yet. And neither is he." "He?" Dumbledore said. "The thing in Quirrell," Harry said. "It's not Quirrell I'm talking about." Dumbledore's expression shifted into something that was, briefly, entirely without performance. He looked at Harry the way Heimdall had looked at him on the bridge, the specific attention of someone encountering something they'd known was coming and had still not quite been ready to see arrive. "Your mother," Dumbledore said, quietly. "Lily. She was extraordinary." "I know," Harry said. "Her protection, what she left you, I know what she left me," Harry said. "And then, because it was true and because it needed to be said, I went back for it, before school started. The package in the vault." He felt Dumbledore's surprise. "She left me a letter. She knew, when she died, that the protection would take a specific form. She understood what she was doing." A pause. "She was remarkable." "Yes," Dumbledore said, very softly. "She was." The fire in the grate moved. The silver instruments made small, considered sounds. The sorting hat, on its shelf, had gone extremely still. "I want to know," Harry said, "when it moves. Whatever you feel in Quirrell, whatever signals you have in the corridor, I want to know when it changes." Dumbledore looked at him. "You're 11 years old." "Yes," Harry said. "What you're suggesting, I'm not suggesting anything dangerous," Harry said. "I'm telling you what I'm going to do when it happens. You can tell me, or I can go in without the advance notice." A pause, not unfriendly. "I'd prefer the notice." A long silence. Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter with those extraordinary blue eyes and Harry Potter looked back with his extraordinary green ones, and between them the fire moved and the instruments ticked and the castle remembered everything, as it always had, as it always would. "Very well," Dumbledore said. "When it moves." "Thank you," Harry said, and stood, and the warmth in his chest was steady and the light in his eyes was exactly what it had always been, and he walked to the door of the office and opened it and stopped. "Professor," he said. "Harry. The blood wards you put on my aunt's house," he said, without turning around. "They broke when I left. I know what they were built on and I know it doesn't work that way. If you'd like to discuss alternative protections for me, now that I'm here, I'm open to that conversation." He paused. "But I thought you should know I know." He didn't wait for the answer. He went down the spiral staircase into the corridor, which was warm and lit and full of the ordinary evening sounds of a school going about its business, and he walked back toward Gryffindor Tower with his hands in his pockets and the old magic of the castle humming in the stones beneath his feet and the cold thread of Voldemort's presence somewhere above him in the dark of the castle. 3 nights later, Harry was on the 7th floor at 2 in the morning when the wall moved. He'd been feeling it all evening, the 7th floor corridor responding to something, the intention-sensitive nature of the space shifting as someone moved through it with strong enough emotion to activate it. He came up after midnight with his mind open and his hands quiet at his sides, and he found it, a door, appearing in the solid wall, leading into a room that smelled like grass and sun and good soil, and somewhere in it, with the specific quiet of a thing at the center of something larger, the steady familiar frequency of a place where the boundary between desire and reality was practically non-existent. He stood in the doorway of the room of requirement and looked at what it had given him. Books, mostly. A fire. A chair the right size, which was a specific detail. On the table near the fire, a photograph, a woman with red hair and green eyes laughing at something off camera, and beside her a man with dark messy hair and glasses, and the photograph was moving, because magical photographs moved, and the woman glanced at Harry and smiled, and it was his mother's smile, and it was also his. He stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he walked in, sat in the chair, picked up the book on the top of the stack, which turned out to be Lily Evans Potter's own research notes on sacrificial love magic, in her handwriting, the room having simply produced what was needed, and began to read. He was still there at 4 in the morning when he felt the cold thread shift. Not move. Not act. Just reorganize. The thing in Quirrell was settling into a patience that was a different kind of patience from the dormant patience it had been showing. More purposeful. The kind of patience that was planning. Harry closed the book. Put it carefully on the table. Looked at the photograph, his mother, still laughing at something he couldn't see. I found Freya, he told her, which was not the same as finding his way back to Lily Potter but was the path that had kept him whole enough to be here now. She's like you. The kind of power she has, it's the same kind. Love that doesn't stop. He paused. You'd have liked her. The photograph woman glanced at him with those green eyes, his eyes, specifically his eyes, and smiled, and it was a warm smile and a sad smile and a proud smile, and Harry held all of it, the whole complicated weight of it, because Frigga had taught him how, and he was grateful for that now. He stayed until the fire died down and the room was cool and the sky outside the high windows was beginning to lighten from black to the deep blue that came before dawn, and then he stood up, tucked his mother's research notes carefully inside his robe, and walked out of the room into the corridor. The castle was quiet around him. The stones warm and old and witnessing everything as they always did, as they had for 1,000 years, as they would when all of this was finished and something else had taken its place. Somewhere below, in a room that smelled of garlic and anxiety and the cold thing underneath both, Voldemort was planning. Harry walked back to Gryffindor Tower in the lightning dark, and he felt his mother's magic in his chest, and Baldur's light in his bones, and Freya's love in the whole structure of his being, and under his feet the old power of the oldest magic the castle was built on. Remembered the feeling of someone worth remembering, and answered it. The stars were still out. Just barely. But they were there. Chapter 5, The Philosopher's Game. The signal came on a Tuesday in June, 3 days before the end of term examinations, arriving not as a message but as a shift in the quality of the castle's ambient magic, subtle enough that Harry thought most of the staff hadn't noticed, significant enough that he'd been expecting it for 2 weeks. He was in the library with Hermione when it happened, working through a transfiguration problem that had been interesting enough to hold his attention for most of the afternoon. The cold thread shifted, the same reorganization he'd felt in the room of requirement back in October, but different now, faster, with the specific urgency of something that had been patient long enough and had run out of patience entirely. The diminished hungry thing in Quirrell had found an angle, and it was moving. He closed his book. Hermione looked up immediately. "What is it?" "It's time," he said. She stared at him. Over the course of the year she had become, gradually and with characteristic thoroughness, one of the people who understood Harry best, which meant she had developed the specific vocabulary for the moments when he said something that was simultaneously perfectly calm and completely serious. "The corridor," she said. "Yes." She put down her quill. "I'm coming." "Hermione, don't," she said, with the sharp preemptive precision of someone who had already constructed and rejected his counterargument. "I've been reading everything you've pointed me toward since September. I know what's in that corridor. I know the challenges. The logic puzzle at the end is mine, you know that." She held his gaze. "I'm coming." He looked at her, at the determination in her, the genuine courage of someone who was frightened and coming anyway because they'd decided the thing mattered more than the fear. He felt the love magic in his chest register her completely and without reservation, the way it registered everything true. "All right," he said. Ron was in the common room, playing chess against himself with the distracted focus of someone who had run out of opponents and was attempting to fill the gap. He saw their faces when they came through the portrait hole and stood up before Harry said anything. "Something's happening," Ron said. "Yes," Harry said. "The corridor thing." "Yes." Ron looked at the chessboard. Looked at Harry. "I'm coming," he said, with the uncomplicated directness that Harry had come to understand was Ron's fundamental character, not the absence of fear, just the absence of deliberation about it once a decision felt right. Neville was sitting near the fire with a herbology textbook and his toad on his knee. He looked up, and Harry met his eyes, and Neville, who had spent a year learning, quietly and steadily, to trust the instincts that had always been there, said, "I'll stay. In case someone needs to know where you've gone." Harry nodded. It was the right call, and Neville had made it himself, which mattered. They went. The third-floor corridor was empty, which Harry had expected. Quirrell had planned this carefully, or rather the thing in Quirrell had planned it, using Quirrell's knowledge of the castle and the staff schedule and the specific timing of a school with 3 days left in the year when supervision was looser and attention was on examinations. The locked door stood at the end of the corridor, and Harry stopped in front of it and felt everything behind it. 3 layers deep, at least. The Cerberus first, he could hear it through the door, the low vibration of 3 sleeping things breathing in unison, sleeping because something had already moved through here and cast the necessary charm. Then, below, the layers of the system Dumbledore had constructed, each one designed by a different mind for a different purpose. And at the bottom, very deep, the thing that was being protected. And somewhere in the system already, moving through it with the desperate velocity of something that had been planning this moment all year, Quirrell. "He's already inside," Hermione said. "Yes," Harry said. He put his hand on the door and felt the lock, a mundane lock, but the magic around it was Fluffy's territory marker, and that was more significant. He worked it carefully, feeling the edges of the enchantment, not breaking it but moving through it the way water moved through rock, finding the existing channels rather than forcing new ones. The door opened. The music was still echoing from somewhere, a harp, enchanted, still playing Fluffy's sleeping charm. The dog was enormous and fascinating and deeply asleep, 3 massive heads resting on overlapping paws, the whole structure of it radiating the kind of unconscious harmlessness that very large things had when they were genuinely at rest. Harry walked past it with genuine appreciation. He'd seen creatures in Asgard that made this one look compact, but there was something specifically wonderful about a 3-headed dog the size of a house that had been charmed to sleep by a harp. The trapdoor was open. They dropped through. The devil's snare was dark and wet and reached for them before they'd landed, which it was designed to do, except that when it reached Harry it paused. Not because Harry did anything specific, he simply landed in it and let it reach and it got hold of him and then did the thing that plants sometimes did when his magic was present and they had enough sensitivity, it registered what he was. Not human, exactly. Not something to be held. Something too warm to treat like prey. It let go. "Light," Hermione said, from somewhere in the green dark tangle of it, already reaching for her wand. She produced a flame, and the snare recoiled, and Ron dropped free, gasping, and they moved through the next chamber. Keys. Hundreds of them, and one specific door, and the keys moved and fluttered, and the logic of it was simple once you understood that the right one would feel different from the others. Harry stood at the center of the chamber and let his magic read them, felt each one, the magic in each, the specific enchanted quality of the one Flitwick had charmed to fit the lock, and found it in less than 10 seconds. He plucked it out of the air. The key didn't fight him. It settled into his hand with the simple willingness of a thing finding its purpose. Hermione stared at him. "How did you do that without a broom?" "It felt different from the others," he said. "They all look exactly the same." "They don't feel the same," he said, and put the key in the lock and opened the door. The chess board was massive and cold and entirely Ron's. Harry saw it the moment they entered the chamber, the giant pieces, black and white, the scale of it, and beside him felt Ron go still in the way he went still when something clicked into a place he understood completely. This was Ron's room the way Hermione's would be, Ron's would not, the way each challenge had been built from the mind of a different teacher, and Harry stepped back without thinking about it because this was not his move. "Ron," he said. "I see it," Ron said, already looking at the board with eyes that were not nervous or overwhelmed but simply reading, the same way Harry read people and Hermione read books. He moved onto the board, took the position of the knight, and began. What followed was not quick. What followed was Ron at his most complete, not the Ron who second-guessed himself in other contexts, who carried the specific weight of being the sixth child in a family of exceptional people, but the Ron who sat in front of a chess board and understood something about strategy that he didn't have language for but didn't need language for. He moved pieces with quiet authority. He read the opposing configuration 5 moves ahead and arranged for what needed to happen. When it was clear what the end position required, when Ron walked Harry and Hermione through his thinking and they saw the shape of it, Harry said, "No. It's the only way through," Ron said. "There's another angle," Harry said. "I've looked at it from every angle," Ron said, with the patience of someone who had been looking at it from every angle for the last 10 minutes. "The White Queen has 2 squares of control that can't be broken from outside. The only way to neutralize her is a sacrifice from within. If you're taken by the Queen, it's a stunning spell," Ron said. "I'll be all right. Go." Harry looked at him. Felt the specific quality of him in this moment, the clarity and the commitment and the choice freely made, no performance, no hesitation, just a person doing the thing that was theirs to do because they decided it was. The love magic in Harry's chest registered it as completely as it registered anything. "You're extraordinary at this," Harry said. Ron blinked. "It's just chess." "It's never just chess," Harry said. Ron looked at him for a moment. "Then, go get whoever's in there. I'll be here when you come back." He made the move. The White Queen took him and Ron went down hard and the board was open. Harry didn't let himself stop because stopping was not what Ron had made the sacrifice for. He ran. The next chamber was the troll, already unconscious. Quirrell had dealt with it on the way through, and then the fire, purple flames on one side and black on the other, and between them a table with 7 bottles and Hermione's logic puzzle. She had it solved in 60 seconds. Harry watched her work, the methodical rigor of her, the pleasure she took in a problem with a correct answer, the way she moved through the logic with the same precision she brought to everything, and felt a straightforward, uncomplicated pride in her that had nothing to do with his own situation. "The smallest bottle," she said, tapping it. "Through the black fire." She held it out to him. "Go back," he said. "Help Ron. Make sure he's all right and get McGonagall." "Harry, I need you to do this," he said. Not because he thought he couldn't do the next part alone, he knew he could. But because someone needed to know, someone needed to be able to tell the story afterward from outside the room, and because Ron was unconscious and Hermione was the person who could get him what he needed. "This part is mine." She looked at him. The logic of it was sound and she was Hermione so she knew it. "Be careful," she said. "I don't think I'm in a great deal of danger," Harry said, honestly. She stared at him. "That is," she said, simultaneously the most reassuring and most worrying thing you could have said. "Go," he said. "I'll see you on the other side." She went back through the purple flame, and Harry drank the smallest bottle, and the black fire was cold going through, and then he was on the other side of it and in the last room. The mirror of Erist stood against the far wall. It was tall and ornate, and the stone floor around it was cold in a way the cold of the fire hadn't been. This was the cold of the diminished thing, the cold thread he'd been feeling since September, fully present now, filling the room with it, pushing against the warmth in his chest with the specific antagonism of two incompatible things occupying the same space. Quirrell stood in front of the mirror with his back to Harry, and his posture was wrong, wrong for a nervous professor, wrong for the man who'd stuttered through a year of defense lessons. He stood with the posture of someone who had stopped maintaining the performance. "I wondered when you'd come through," Quirrell said, still not turning around. "I wasn't in a hurry," Harry said. Quirrell turned, and the change was complete, the stutter gone, the anxious softness gone, the face of the man underneath the performance clear and tired and intelligent in a way the performance had obscured. He was not a stupid man, Harry realized. He had made a terrible choice a long time ago, and the terrible choice had consumed him, which was a tragedy of a specific kind. "You've been watching me all year," Quirrell said. "Yes," Harry said. "Most students don't notice," Quirrell said. "Most students haven't been taught to," Harry said. Quirrell looked at him. In the cold of the room, with the diminished thing present and reaching, his expression had something in it that was almost relief, the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying something for too long and was close enough to the end of it that putting it down seemed possible. "The stone is in the mirror," Quirrell said. "I can see it, but I can't reach it. The enchantment prevents anyone who wants to use it from taking it." He paused. "He thought you might be able to get it. You, specifically." "I know," Harry said. "He's been watching you all year too," Quirrell said. "Through me. He's," a breath, with an effort behind it, "very interested in you." "I know that too," Harry said. He walked toward the mirror, and Quirrell stepped aside, not willingly, Harry thought, but because the thing directing him wanted Harry in front of the glass. He walked to it and looked at his reflection. The mirror showed him what he desired most. He had expected his mother. Expected his father, perhaps, or Asgard, or Freya and Baldur, or the simple comforting image of everyone he loved gathered in one place. He had thought about this mirror since Hermione had mentioned it 2 weeks ago with the expression of someone who had found something in Hogwarts, a history that troubled her, and he had wondered what it would show someone like him. It showed him the stone in his pocket. His reflection reached into its pocket and produced the philosopher's stone, red, smooth, the size of a plum, and slipped it back into the pocket, and Harry felt a slight weight in his actual pocket, and understood. He didn't want the stone for use. He wanted it found. He wanted the thing behind this mirror resolved, the old unfinished working of his mother's magic completed, the cold thread severed. The mirror had read not his fantasy but his purpose, and his purpose was the closest thing he had to desire in this room, so it had given him exactly that. He reached into his pocket and the stone was there. He closed his hand around it and turned away from the mirror. Quirrell was watching him with an expression that was not Quirrell's expression. There was something else in it now, something that had been looking through Quirrell's eyes for months and was looking through them with full attention now, no longer bothering to hide inside the borrowed vision. "Give it to me," Quirrell said, in a voice that was partly Quirrell's and partly something older and colder underneath. "No," Harry said. "You don't understand what you're holding," Quirrell said, the other voice getting clearer, the cold in the room getting specific, directional, aimed at Harry with the focus of a thing that had been wanting and reaching for this moment since the night it had failed to kill a baby in a house in Godric's Hollow and had lost most of itself in the trying. "I understand exactly what I'm holding," Harry said. "A stone that creates immortality. Which someone wants because they're afraid of dying, which means they already understand on some level that they should." He looked at Quirrell directly. "Or rather, the thing inside you understands it." The temperature dropped another degree. "Turn around," Quirrell said. "Why?" "Turn around and face me." "I am facing you," Harry said. Not me, Quirrell said, and his hands came up to the turban, and he began to unwrap it. Harry had known what was under the turban since October, in the same way he'd known about the stone and the connection and the quality of the cold thread. He watched the unwrapping with the same attention he'd given everything this year, present, open, reading. The face when it appeared was at the back of Quirrell's head, pale, barely there, the quality of something that had shed most of its material substance and was operating on pure will and hatred, which was more than enough will for most things. The eyes were red. They found Harry's immediately, with the specific urgency of something that had been waiting to see this particular face up close for 11 years, and the weight of the attention was enormous, the gathered force of a great dark mind focused entirely on him, the way a lens focused light, burning wherever it landed. Harry met the red eyes and felt nothing he hadn't already expected to feel. The connection between them, the thread he'd been feeling since the train, since Ollivanders, the one bond that ran between their matched cores, he felt it at full strength now, the way you felt a cord when someone pulled it taut. Both ends of it were present in this room and the cord ran between them, invisible, live. Harry Potter, Voldemort said, and in his voice was the voice of a man who had decided something about Harry Potter a long time ago and was finding the reality of him somewhat more complicated than the decision had accounted for. You are not what I expected. You're exactly what I expected, Harry said. The red eyes narrowed fractionally. You're not afraid. No, Harry said. Everything is afraid of me, Voldemort said, and it was not a boast, it was something closer to a factual statement, the confident reporting of observed data. That's because most things you've encountered have had something to lose that you could reach, Harry said. I'm not structured the same way. No, Voldemort said. Something moved in the red eyes, not the anger Harry had anticipated, but the specific quality of a mind encountering a problem it hadn't modeled. What are you? I've been watching you all year. You are not a standard result of the Potter line. No, Harry agreed. The light, Voldemort said. The light in you is divine. I know the smell of divine magic. I have studied things far older than this school, boy, I know when I'm looking at something that did not come from mortal sources. A pause. Who raised you? People who love me, Harry said, and felt the love magic respond to the truth of it, felt it warm in his chest, felt the stone warm in his hand, felt the old working of his mother's sacrifice present and entire in this room where everything had started. Love, Voldemort said, and in the way he said it was the entire philosophy, the contempt and the fear and the terrible intellectual honesty of a man who had decided love was a weakness because he needed it to be a weakness, because the alternative was that it was a strength he could never possess. You sound like your mother. Good, Harry said. She died for it, Voldemort said. She won with it, Harry said. She defeated you with it. You were the most powerful dark wizard alive and she stopped you with love and you've spent 11 years as something that has to live in the back of people's heads because of it. A pause. You know that's what happened. You're intelligent enough to know exactly what happened, and it terrifies you, because it means love is real. Not sentiment. Not weakness. An actual force. And you can't touch it. Something in the air of the room changed. The cold gathered. Voldemort's face, what was left of it, the hollow eyes and the pale determination of something that had pared itself down to will alone, shifted into a focus that was completely without ambient feeling, the way a blade was without ambient feeling, just edge and direction. Give me the stone, he said, and the air moved with the command of it, the genuine power of a mind that had bent reality through will alone for most of its existence. Harry felt it land against him. Felt the weight of the command, the magical pressure of it. He stood in it the way he stood in everything, present, clear, grounded, and let it move against him and past him the way the rain on Privet Drive had moved through him a long time ago, when he'd been different. No, he said. Quirrell moved. His hands came up and Harry felt the spell form, felt the intention of it, the dark sharp quality of a curse that had been designed to end things, and he did something Freya had taught him in Vanaheim when he was 6 years old and which she had called the simplest use of love magic and which he had understood then as something simple and now understood as something profound. He didn't defend. He didn't raise a shield or cast a ward or move. He let the magic that was his mother's, Freya's gift, Baldur's light, the whole accumulated love of 7 years of being chosen and kept and taught, come to the surface. The way Baldur's light was always at the surface. The way Baldur had told him, on a wall in Asgard looking at stars, it's not something I produce. It's what I am. The light came off him. Not a spell. Not a cast thing, not a deployed thing. Just himself, present in full. The curse hit it and the cold of it met the warmth of it and the warmth was stronger because warmth was always stronger than cold when you had enough of it. Cold was only the absence of warmth, and Harry was not absent of anything, he was full, had been full since a woman with green eyes walked into death with her arms open for a baby who would one day find his way to Asgard and back, and Quirrell's spell broke. Not deflected. Broke. Came apart into its components, the dark intent dispersing like smoke dispersing in wind, nothing left of it to arrive anywhere. Quirrell stared at his own hands. Touch him, Voldemort said, urgency in the cold voice now. Touch the boy, Quirrell grabbed Harry's wrist. The contact was immediate and total. Harry's magic, fully present, met Quirrell, not Voldemort, Quirrell, the man underneath the possession, the tired, damaged, regretful actual human being who had made a terrible choice and been living in its consequences, and Harry felt the truth of him with the full specificity of love magic reading what it touched, all of it, everything Quirrell was and had been and was not anymore. And then the divine light of Baldur, which lived in Harry's bones and his blood and his skin, which could not be turned off any more than Baldur could turn it off, which was simply what Harry was at the deepest level, that came through the contact. The effect on Voldemort was immediate and catastrophic. The face on the back of Quirrell's head recoiled. The cold in the room spiked, panicked, became less controlled, the cold not of a predator but of something cornered, something that had just encountered something it had no preparation for and no defense against. The connection between them, the wand cord, the scar, the 11 years of the link, Harry felt it as a physical thing, vibrating with the force of what his magic was doing, carrying the warmth into Voldemort the way Quirrell's hands carried it, the love coming through the same channel the hatred had been running along for a decade. Voldemort screamed. Not Quirrell. Voldemort. The voice that came out of Quirrell's mouth was not Quirrell's voice, it was something older, something that had been surviving through force of will and dark magic and borrowed bodies for 11 years, and the warmth now flooding it through the connection was the thing it was most afraid of, the thing it had built its entire philosophy against. The love that had defeated it before was in the room again, and this time it wasn't one woman's sacrifice. It was that plus 7 years of divine upbringing, the full focused weight of a goddess's gift and a god's light and a mother's immortal working, and Voldemort was diminished and desperate and it was not enough, nothing was enough, against the thing that Harry simply was. Quirrell's body couldn't hold it. The host that had been sustaining Voldemort's presence through a year of possession, running thin for months, cracked under the dual pressure of Harry's contact and Voldemort's panicked departure. Harry let go of him, not because he was afraid of hurting Quirrell, but because the possession was already breaking and the man under it needed to not have any more weight on him than necessary. Quirrell dropped. The cold in the room tore. The air made a sound like a breath sucked in hard and then expelled, and there was a presence, vast and dark and very briefly at full extension, the shape of Voldemort at the moment of departure, more than the fragment that had been hiding in Quirrell, the whole terrible shape of what Tom Riddle had made himself into, and then it was gone, passing through the wall of the chamber and out into the castle and out beyond the castle into whatever dark it retreated to when it had to retreat. The room was very warm. Harry stood in the middle of it and breathed. He looked down at Quirrell, unconscious on the stone floor, and felt the absence in him, the absence of the cold thing, Quirrell alone now, just a man. He would need help. He would need significant help and then probably a very long time to recover and then a great deal of reckoning with his own choices, in that order. Harry crouched and pressed a hand briefly to his shoulder, not for magic, just for the gesture, for the acknowledgement that underneath everything Quirrell had been a person being consumed, and then straightened. He opened his hand and looked at the stone. Red. Warm. Lighter than it looked, as if its weight was philosophical rather than physical. He felt the thing his mother's magic had been oriented toward since the night she died, the unfinished quality of the working, the not yet done that had been present in his chest underneath everything else, and felt it change. Not complete, exactly. This was not the completion. Voldemort was not gone, they both knew that. Harry had felt the size of him in that moment of departure, and he was still substantial, still capable, still somewhere in the dark outside the castle making the slow difficult path back to himself. This was not done. But something had moved. The shape of it had changed. The unfinished working had moved one necessary step toward its conclusion, and what was left was a different shape from what had been there before. He pocketed the stone. He looked at the mirror of Erist. His reflection looked back at him, no stone in its hand now, just his own face, familiar and clear and entirely his. He looked at it for a moment and felt, simply, that he was exactly what he was, and that was sufficient. He turned to the door. Behind him, very quietly, the mirror's surface went dark. Dumbledore arrived 40 minutes later, which was exactly 12 minutes after Harry had emerged from the trapdoor into the third-floor corridor and told McGonagall, who had gone white-faced and crisp and efficient with the specific quality of someone converting shock into action, exactly what had happened. He came through the corridor with the velocity of a man who had received the news and recalibrated everything he was doing to get here, and stopped when he saw Harry sitting on a bench outside the third-floor door, which had closed itself behind him as if considering the whole business finished. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "He's gone," Harry said. "Quirrell is alive. He needs medical attention immediately. Pomfrey should prioritize removing the possession residue, it's toxic to hold the body if you don't clear it properly. The stone is here." He held it out. Dumbledore stared at the stone in his extended hand. He crossed to him, took it, held it in both hands for a moment with an expression that moved through several registers simultaneously, relief, and grief, and something that was the feeling of a man who had expected to be the person in this room and was holding the evidence that someone else had been there instead. "Are you all right?" Dumbledore asked. "Yes," Harry said. He was there. Voldemort himself. A fragment of him. Significant fragment. It's gone now, not destroyed, just expelled. He still exists somewhere. A pause. That part isn't finished. Dumbledore sat down on the bench beside him. He sat with the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying something for too long and had just put it down, not permanently, but far enough to feel the weight leave. He looked at the stone. He looked at Harry. "What happened in there?" he said, and it was different from his usual questions, not the chess player asking for information, just a man asking because he wanted to understand. "I held what I am," Harry said. "And let it be enough." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Your mother was there," Harry said. "The way she's always been there." Dumbledore nodded slowly. He was looking at Harry with those blue eyes at their most direct, most without calculation, the eyes, Harry thought, that probably only appeared when something had broken through the performance of wisdom to the actual person underneath. He looked old. Not ancient the way Odin looked old, not the old of someone who had chosen and paid and continued regardless, just the old of a man who had been making decisions for a very long time and was tired. "I owe you an apology," Dumbledore said. "Several, I think. For the blood wards. For planning around you rather than with you. For the particular arrogance of believing I was the only one who could see the board." He paused. "I am not accustomed to encountering someone who has already moved past my starting position." "I know," Harry said. "Not unkindly." "Will you tell me," Dumbledore said, "about the people who raised you?" "Not operationally. I don't need to know what they're capable of for strategy purposes." He paused. "I'd like to understand what kind of people produced this." A gesture that encompassed Harry, which was, Harry noted, the most honest gesture Dumbledore had made all year. Harry thought about it. He thought about the kitchen in Asgard and Freya and the bread that tasted like it meant it. He thought about Baldur on the outer wall with the stars. He thought about Thor shouting "I like this one" at a fence. Good ones, he said. The genuinely good kind. The kind that doesn't need anything from you to be good. He looked at the torchlit ceiling of the third-floor corridor. You should meet them. I expect I will, Dumbledore said, with the tone of someone who had calculated this as inevitable and was finding the prospect less alarming than he'd expected. McGonagall appeared at the corridor's end moving at speed with Madame Pomfrey behind her and 2 other staff members, and the administrative machinery of the school reasserted itself around them the way administrative machinery always did, filling the space that had been held for other things. Harry stood up. His pocket was empty, the stone was in Dumbledore's hands, and his chest was warm and the connection through his scar was quiet, the cold thread diminished to something barely present, far away, curled in on itself somewhere dark and patient. Not gone. But smaller. He put his hands in his pockets and walked back down the corridor toward the stairs, and above him the enchanted ceiling of the great hall was showing the right stars for June, the summer stars, Vega and Arcturus, and the faint smear of the Milky Way moving in its slow prescribed arc above a school that was still full of sleeping students who would wake tomorrow morning and not know that anything had happened here tonight. That was all right. Some things were done quietly. Some things didn't need an audience. He went to check on Ron. Chapter 6, Love is the Oldest Magic. Ron was awake by the time Harry reached the hospital wing, sitting up in the bed with a bruise along his jaw and the slightly dazed quality of someone who had been stunned hard and was currently doing inventory of all his parts. Hermione was in the chair beside him, upright and composed except for the state of her hair, which had given up entirely. She looked up when Harry came through the door and something in her face went from tightly controlled to simply relieved in one clean motion. "You're fine," she said, which was both an observation and an accusation. "I'm fine," he confirmed. "Quirrell," Ron said. "Alive. Pomfrey's dealing with him." Harry pulled a chair to the other side of Ron's bed and sat. "How's the jaw?" "Hurts," Ron said, with the straightforward honesty he brought to most things. The Queen hit like she meant it. He paused. "Did you get it?" "Yes." "And the other thing?" "Gone. For now." Ron processed this. "For now," he repeated. "He's not destroyed," Harry said. "Just expelled. He'll find a way back eventually, it might take years, but he'll try again." He looked at both of them. "I want you to understand that. This isn't over. Tonight was one chapter." Hermione was already thinking through the implications, he could see it in her expression, the rapid internal cross-referencing that was her particular genius. "He'll need a body," she said. "He'll need to rebuild. He's been weakened twice now by the same magic. He'll be more careful about how he approaches you next time." "Yes," Harry said. "Which means we have time," she said. "We have time," he agreed. Ron looked between them. "This is the part where normal people would be relieved and stop thinking about it for at least one night," he said. "Are you normal people?" Harry asked. "I was hoping," Ron said, and then laughed, which turned into a wince because of the jaw, and Hermione told him not to laugh, and Harry leaned back in his chair and felt the hospital wing around him, warm, medicinal, full of the specific quiet of a place designed for recovery, and for the first time since Tuesday let himself simply be in the moment without scanning it for what was coming next. The school found out the next morning. Not the complete version, not the stone, not Voldemort, not the full architecture of what had happened in the chamber below the third floor. What spread through the corridors of Hogwarts on Wednesday was the version that traveled fastest, which was incomplete and emotionally vivid. Something had happened, Harry Potter was involved, Quirrell was in the hospital wing, and there were a remarkable number of people who claimed to have known something was off about the defense professor all year. Harry moved through it with the equanimity he moved through most things, which consistently unsettled people who expected him to be either overwhelmed or performatively modest. He was neither. He was present and warm and entirely himself, which was, he'd found, the most unsettling option available. Draco Malfoy intercepted him in the corridor before breakfast, with the specific posture of someone who had made a decision about something and was committed to delivering it before they could reconsider. "What happened?" Draco said. No preamble, no social lubrication. Harry looked at him. "Quirrell turned out to be a problem," he said. "It's dealt with." "There's a rumor that you know who was involved," Draco said, and the name, the non-name, the refusal to name, carried the specific weight of a fear so thoroughly installed in a community that even the children who'd grown up after the defeat still wouldn't say it. "His name is Voldemort," Harry said. Draco's expression did what everyone's expression did when he said it, a brief, involuntary contraction, a physical flinch, the deep-conditioned response of years of collective avoidance. Then, to his credit, he steadied. "Was he there?" "A piece of him," Harry said. "And you dealt with it," Harry said. Draco was quiet for a moment. Behind the Malfoy composure something was working, the same undertow Harry had felt in Madame Malkin's back in September, the part of him that was less certain than the surface and was doing careful quiet calculations. "My father," Draco said, "has certain opinions about the Dark Lord's return." "I know," Harry said. "He'll be displeased." "I imagine so," Harry said, without particular concern. Draco looked at him with those sharp grey eyes, and Harry looked back with the comfortable, undefensive directness he'd given Draco since Madame Malkin's, and something passed between them, not friendship, not yet, but the particular acknowledgement of two people who have decided the other is worth keeping in accurate perspective. "You're nothing like what I expected," Draco said, and it was not quite a compliment and not quite a complaint. Somewhere in between. An honest observation from someone learning to make them. "I know," Harry said. "Breakfast?" Draco blinked. "You're inviting me to breakfast." "There's no rule against it," Harry said. A pause. A very Malfoy pause, full of the rapid assessment of social implication. Then, with a slight recalibration visible in the set of his shoulders, "Fine." They walked to the great hall together, which Hermione noticed immediately and noted with a raised eyebrow that Harry answered with a slight shake of his head that meant later, and which Ron noticed and processed with the open-faced philosophical acceptance of someone deciding to reserve judgment. Dumbledore found Harry after breakfast, which Harry had expected. Not in the office this time, in the corridor outside the Great Hall, with the specific informality of someone who wanted to have a different kind of conversation from the last one. "The Board of Governors will be making inquiries," Dumbledore said, which was his opening move and told Harry the shape of the concern. "About Quirrell," Harry said. "And about what happened in the lower chambers." A pause. "About you, specifically." Harry looked at him. "What are you going to tell them?" "The truth, as I understand it," Dumbledore said. "Which is considerably less than the full truth, since the full truth involves elements I don't entirely understand myself." He held Harry's gaze. "I've sent word to, I'm not certain how to describe them. The people who raised you. I've sent word through the only channel I have access to, which is Hogwarts' own magical record." "Freya already knows," Harry said. "She knew when it was happening." Dumbledore absorbed this. "She could feel it from distance," Harry said, "isn't really an obstacle for her." "No," Dumbledore said. "I suppose not." He was quiet for a moment. "She's coming." "They both are," Harry said. "Tomorrow, I think. They said they'd give the school time to settle first." He paused. "Freya said, and I'm quoting her, that she wanted the dust to settle before she came through because she preferred not to have an audience for the conversation she intended to have with you." Dumbledore's expression was the expression of a man filing this information alongside several other pieces of information and arriving at a conclusion he was not entirely comfortable with. "I see," he said. "She's not angry," Harry said. "No. She's something more specific than angry," Harry said. She's Freya. There's a difference. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Are you prepared for that conversation? He said. I'm not the one who needs to prepare, Harry said, pleasantly. The end-of-year examinations happened anyway, which Harry found mildly funny. The machinery of the school reasserted itself with the determination of something that had been running for 1,000 years and was not going to be diverted by a partial Voldemort possession and a buried chamber of challenges and whatever the hospital wing was currently dealing with. They sat their exams. Hermione was exceptional. Ron was solid in everything except astronomy, which he said afterward was because the star charts were badly printed and which Hermione very diplomatically did not directly contradict. Harry sat his exams with the particular ease of someone who had been educated by beings who considered 1,000 years a reasonable timeline for mastering a subject, which made the first-year curriculum feel approximately like being asked to describe a color he'd been looking at his whole life. He completed each paper in half the allocated time and spent the rest of it watching his classmates, which was more interesting and told him more than the papers did. He watched Neville work through herbology with a confidence that hadn't been there in September, not the manufactured confidence of someone who'd been told to believe in themselves, but the real kind, the kind that grew when you'd done the work and knew you'd done it. He watched Hermione move through theory of magic with the absolute precision of a mind that had been doing exactly what it was made for. He watched Ron play wizard's chess against himself in his head during the break between papers, working through a problem nobody else could see, and he felt the warmth in his chest register it with the completeness it gave to everything true. He thought about what came after. They came on Thursday evening, which was 2 days before the end-of-term feast, which Harry later thought was exactly the right timing, close enough that things had settled but not so late that the moment had passed. He felt them arrive the way he always felt Freya arrive, the warmth preceding her the way warmth preceded a fire, the specific quality of her presence moving through the castle's magical field the way a large friendly ship moved through water. He was in the courtyard when she walked through the main gate, and she crossed the flagstones to him and took his face in her hands and looked at him with those eyes that had, the first time he'd seen them, been reading a 4-year-old in a cupboard, and he felt her read him now with the same directness, looking for damage, for cost, for the shape of what the night in the chamber had left behind. I'm all right, he said. I know, she said. I needed to see it. She kissed his forehead, which she had done since he was 4 years old and which she would presumably do when he was 400 if the opportunity arose, and Harry let it because it was Freya and this was what she was. Baldur came through the gate behind her, dressed in mortal clothing again, the grey wool and the quiet that was always insufficient to contain what he actually was, and walked to Harry and put a hand on his shoulder, and they stood like that for a moment without speaking because some things didn't require it. It worked, Harry said. Everything you both gave me. It worked exactly the way it was supposed to. Of course it did, Freya said, which was not arrogance. It was faith. The specific kind that knew what it had made and had no doubts about the making. Voldemort isn't gone, Harry said. No, Baldur said. But he ran from you. His expression moved slightly, that quiet, specific thing that happened when something mattered to him enough to surface. That matters. It matters enormously, Freya said. The most feared dark wizard in a century turned and ran from our son. She paused. I've been very calm about all of this, all year. I want you to know that. I know, Harry said. I'm less calm now that it's over, she said. I know that too, Harry said. You've been doing the thing where you're calm and then when the thing is done you're not. That's a very specific thing to notice, she said. You taught me to notice specific things, he said, and she made the sound she made when she was simultaneously exasperated and completely satisfied. McGonagall appeared in the doorway of the entrance hall with the expression of someone who had been told to expect extraordinary visitors and was now confirming the accuracy of the description. She looked at Freya and Baldur with the professional appraisal of a woman who had been a Hogwarts professor for decades and had seen a considerable variety of things come through those doors. Professor McGonagall, Harry said. This is Freya and Baldur. My parents. McGonagall looked at Freya. She looked at Baldur. She looked at Harry. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, which was long for her, and then said, "The headmaster is expecting you." "Yes," Freya said. "He is." Harry went with them to Dumbledore's office, because there was no reason not to and several reasons to, and because he wanted to be in the room when the conversation happened. Dumbledore was behind his desk when they came in, standing rather than seated, which was a choice Harry noted. Standing was less positional, less performative, more honest. The silver instruments were quiet. The portraits of former headmasters were paying close attention, though most of them were doing it while apparently looking at something else. Dumbledore looked at Freya, and the quality of his expression was the expression of a man who had been preparing for a meeting and was discovering that his preparation had been inadequate, not because he'd prepared badly but because what walked into the room was more than the category he'd prepared for. He looked at Baldur, and something shifted further. "Albus Dumbledore," Freya said. Not unkindly. Not warmly either. The tone of someone establishing a register. "You are Freya," Dumbledore said. "Norse goddess of love, beauty, war, and magic." He paused. "And you, to Baldur, are Baldur. God of light and purity. Son of Odin." Another pause, with the specific quality of a man recalibrating in real time. "I confess I had theorized something extraordinary when I saw what Harry was. I didn't quite arrive at the correct extraordinary." "Most people don't," Baldur said. "Please sit down," Dumbledore said, and moved from behind the desk entirely, taking a chair by the fire rather than the one behind the desk, which was the most significant thing he'd done since they walked in. Freya sat. Baldur stood. Harry leaned against the wall near the bookcase with his arms folded, comfortable and present. "He told you what happened," Freya said. "He told me the shape of it," Dumbledore said. "I suspect there are dimensions I don't have the framework to understand." "There are," Freya said. "Let me give you the relevant ones." She leaned forward with her elbows on her knees, which was the posture she used when she was saying something she meant entirely and wanted no ambiguity about. Lily Potter's sacrifice was a working of love magic so concentrated and intentional that it left a permanent structure in Harry. Not a charm. Not a ward. A fundamental reorientation of his magical makeup around a principle. She held Dumbledore's gaze. "I felt it from Asgard. I came and found him in a cupboard and took him home, and I want to be honest with you about what I thought of that cupboard, so that you understand the full picture." Dumbledore was very still. "I understand," he said, quietly, "that the decision about your sister's son," he began. "Don't," Freya said. Pleasantly, but with the specific quality of a door closing. "I know your reasoning. Lily's protection, the blood wards, the safest location for the power to anchor itself. It's a sound magical theory and it required a child to sleep in a space the size of a storage closet without adequate food or warmth for 3 years, and I want you to sit with both of those things being true simultaneously rather than using one to cancel the other." Dumbledore sat with it. Harry watched him sit with it, watched the man who had been moving pieces on boards for 60 years receive something that his piece moving had cost, and not deflect it, and not justify it, and simply receive it. It was, Harry thought, probably one of the braver things he'd seen this year. "You're right," Dumbledore said. "I am sorry." "I know you are," Freya said. "I also know that sorry doesn't change what was. What changes what will be is different choices going forward." She paused. "Harry is coming back." Dumbledore looked at Harry. "You want to return?" "Yes," Harry said. "Even knowing that Voldemort will try again? That Hogwarts will be the location of continued conflict?" "That's exactly why," Harry said. "The unfinished working isn't done. Voldemort isn't destroyed. Whatever he's been building toward, the things he set in motion before his first defeat, the preparations, the contingencies, they're still out there. And they'll come through this school, or to it, or near it." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "I'm not afraid of it. But I want to be here when it comes." "And you believe Hogwarts is safer with you in it," Dumbledore said. I think the students in this school deserve someone who will stand in front of things that want to hurt them, Harry said. I told someone that recently. The sorting hat, on its shelf, was extremely still. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Freya. You'll allow this? I don't allow Harry things, Freya said, with the mild amusement of someone encountering a concept from an unexpected angle. He's not mine to allow or prevent. He's mine to trust. A pause. There's a difference. One I'm coming to understand, Dumbledore said. Baldur spoke from where he was standing, and when Baldur spoke in a quiet room with the specific weight of full intent behind it, the room listened. You've been playing a long game, Albus. We understand the game and we understand why you've been playing it. But Harry has told us your methods, and the people who raised him have some thoughts on the subject of using people, even for good reasons, as positions on a board. Dumbledore met his eyes. Baldur's light in the office was doing what it always did when he was fully present, making everything else in the room slightly clearer, slightly more itself, the way good lighting revealed what was actually there. Under it, Dumbledore looked like a man rather than a headmaster, which was perhaps more accurate. I am aware, Dumbledore said, that I have a tendency to manage situations from a position that assumes I have more clarity than others. Yes, Baldur said. I am less aware, in the moment of doing it, that it's happening. Also yes, Baldur said. The people most capable of seeing the board often have the hardest time remembering that the pieces have their own views. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You're considerably more direct than I expected from someone described as the gentlest of the Norse gods. Gentle doesn't mean indirect, Baldur said. Kindness is most useful when it's honest. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression, a quality that Harry associated with Odin at his most genuinely thoughtful, when the wisdom was actual rather than performed. He nodded slowly. I'll do better, he said. I believe you, Harry said, from the wall, and meant it, because believing people capable of better was one of the things his mother's magic made him very good at, and it was one of the things he most liked about himself. The feast was the following evening. The hall was dressed in the end-of-year warmth that it reserved for this occasion, and the tables were full and loud with the specific joy of children finishing something and looking toward summer, and the ceiling showed a clear night sky thick with stars. Harry sat with his house, with Ron on one side and Hermione on the other and Neville across from him eating something he'd been growing in a pot in the dormitory window for 3 months and had finally been convinced to try his food. Ron's jaw had healed, and Hermione had finished the year with the highest marks in their year, and Neville had successfully grown something that shouldn't have survived the indoor conditions of a Scottish castle and was unreasonably proud of it, and Harry sat in the middle of all of them and felt the warmth in his chest and said nothing specific because nothing specific was needed. Gryffindor won the House Cup. Dumbledore added last-minute points for Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville with the specific announcements that made Slytherin's victory seem close until they weren't, and the hall was loud and Neville went red from ears to collar and Ron made a noise like a small controlled explosion of satisfaction. Harry applauded with everyone else. He looked up at the high table and met Dumbledore's gaze across the hall, and Dumbledore inclined his head, not the chess player's nod, not the calculation, just one person acknowledging another, and Harry nodded back. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was looking at the Gryffindor celebration with an expression that was calibrating rapidly between instilled by upbringing resentment and something considerably more complicated and not yet named. Harry caught his eye. Draco held it for a moment, then looked away, but not with hostility. Just with the particular discomfort of someone adjusting. Give it time, Loki's voice said, in the part of Harry's mind where good advice lived. Freya and Baldur were waiting on the platform at King's Cross when the Hogwarts Express came in, which was not something Harry had expected and which made him smile from about 3 carriages back when he saw them through the window. They were standing on the platform in the summer evening crowd and they looked, despite everything, despite the grey wool and the careful mortal clothing, completely and entirely themselves. Freya with the golden light she couldn't quite suppress under the fluorescence and Baldur with the quality of his presence that made the crowd move around them without noticing they were doing it. Harry got off the train with his trunk and his owl and Ron beside him. Those are your parents? Ron said. Yes, Harry said. Ron looked at them. Looked at Harry. Looked at them again with the expression of someone doing a rapid reassessment of several things simultaneously. Your mum is, yes, Harry said. And your dad is, yes. Right, Ron said, in the tone of someone tabling a large number of questions for a later date. Freya saw him coming and started toward him, and behind her Baldur followed, and Harry closed the distance between them with the easy certainty of someone going towards something that had never stopped being home regardless of which realm it was in. She met him halfway and hugged him, properly, without reservation, and he felt the warmth of her magic and the warmth of his own meeting in the comfortable way they'd met for 7 years. You were magnificent, she said, against the top of his head. You didn't watch, he said. I felt it, she said, which was different from watching and more than watching, and she didn't need to explain the distinction. Every bit of it. The stone. The light. The moment you decided to simply be what you are. She pulled back and looked at him, and her eyes were bright with the specific brightness of someone who was very happy and was not particularly trying to manage that fact. I was extraordinarily proud. You were worried, he said. I was both, she said. Simultaneously. The whole time. Welcome to how I feel about you every single day. Baldur reached them, and Harry looked at him, and Baldur's expression did the thing it rarely did in the presence of people who might observe it. It let go of the careful management and just showed what was there, which was the complete uncalculated pride and love of a man who had chosen a child and given everything he had to give and was standing in a train station looking at the result. The cup thing at the end, Harry said to him. Dumbledore awarding the house points. Did you feel that? No, Baldur said. What happened? He gave Neville 10 points for pure nerve, Harry said. Neville stood up in front of his own house in September and said we shouldn't be going after the stone. He was right. He lost us points for it and he did it anyway. Harry looked back toward the train where Neville was being found by his grandmother on the platform. Dumbledore knew. He'd known since it happened. He saved the points for tonight. Baldur watched Neville on the platform. He did that very well, he said. He did a lot of things wrong, Harry said. And then he did that well. He looked at Baldur. People are like that. Yes, Baldur said. They are. It's the best thing about them, Harry said. Freya made the sound that was her version of absolute agreement. Ron appeared at his elbow, with Hermione a step behind him and her trunk slightly too large for one person to be managing, which she was managing anyway. Ron looked at Freya and Baldur with the careful politeness of someone who had been raised with good manners and was applying them to a situation that significantly exceeded their original parameters. These are my parents, Harry said. Freya, Baldur, Ron, Hermione. Freya looked at Ron with the specific attention of someone reading a new person with full interest. You were in the chess chamber, she said. Ron blinked. Harry told you. He told me everything, she said. What you did, the sacrifice you made, that took real understanding of what mattered more than yourself. That's not a small thing. Ron went slightly red. It was just chess, he said, in the exact tone Harry had predicted he would use. It's never just chess, Freya said, with the certainty of someone who had heard this recently and was very pleased to be repeating it. Harry grinned. Ron looked between them and decided, with visible resignation, that there were patterns here he was not going to unravel quickly. Hermione, who had been looking at Freya with the expression she wore when she was processing something at maximum speed, said, You're real. Very, Freya said. The Norse pantheon, Hermione said. Is actual. Yes, Freya said. There must be, the implications for magical theory alone, she stopped. Sorry. I'll ask that later. That's rude right now. It's completely fine, Freya said, with the warmth of someone recognizing a quality they recognized. I suspect we'll have plenty of time for magical theory. Harry says you're coming back next year. Obviously, Hermione said. Then we'll talk, Freya said. I have 7,000 years of material you haven't been exposed to. Hermione stared at her. Then pulled out a notebook from her bag. Hermione, Ron said. Just dates and references, she said. I'll organize properly later. They found a quiet corner of the station while the platform traffic thinned around them, and Harry stood between Freya and Baldur with his trunk and his owl and the specific comfortable fullness of the end of something significant, and he looked at the board departure signs and thought about second year the way Loki had taught him to think about the next move, not anxiously, not with dread, but with the forward-looking interest of someone who understood that the game was unfolding in their place and it was real and chosen. He'll be back, Harry said, to Freya. Voldemort. It won't be long. No, Freya agreed. He has things in place. Things from before. I could feel the shape of them when he was in the room, not the details, just the scale of it. He prepared for a long absence. Loki wants to come and examine what you felt, Freya said. He's been annoyingly interested since I told him the details. Of course he has, Harry said. He said, and I'm quoting him, that a dark wizard who prepared contingencies for his own death sounds like someone he'd find professionally fascinating. That's either very reassuring or very alarming, Harry said. Both, Baldur said. Simultaneously. Harry smiled. He looked back at the station around them, the last families finding each other, the owls settling, the ordinary managed chaos of a world that didn't know it was being watched and helped and quietly, fiercely protected by things it had no framework for understanding. I want to find out more about the Horcruxes, Harry said. Freya went very still. Baldur turned to look at him. You know what they are? Freya said. I felt them, Harry said. In him. The sense of a soul, not whole. Pieces of it. Deliberately broken off and put somewhere. That's what makes him unkillable the ordinary way. That's why the fragment in Quirrell was so small, it was one fragment of something that had been divided many times. He looked at her. I don't know how many. But more than one, and they're hidden. And until they're found and dealt with, expelling him from borrowed bodies is the only available solution. Freya and Baldur looked at each other. The look that passed between them was the specific long look of two people who had spent years across centuries knowing each other's thoughts, and what Harry read in it was, he got there faster than we expected, and of course he did, and now we have to decide what we tell him. Tell me, Harry said. We suspected, Freya said. The cold thread, the quality of his connection with you, it felt like something fragmented, something incomplete. We've been researching. Loki has been researching. There are very old texts in Asgard, how many? Harry said. We believe 7, Baldur said. The soul divided 6 times plus whatever fragment remained in him. Harry took this in. 7. 7 hidden anchors of a fractured soul, scattered across the mortal world. He thought about the cold thread in his scar. He thought about the stone, and the mirror, and the complete presence of Voldemort in that chamber despite the fragment being so small, and understood suddenly that Voldemort would always be able to bring the full force of his will to bear because his will was not in the bodies, it was in the pieces. The immortality wasn't the stone. The stone had been a convenience. The immortality was the Horcruxes. He breathed through it. 1 year at a time, he said. 1 year at a time, Freya agreed. But we start looking, he said. We've already started, she said. He nodded. He felt the love magic in his chest, his mother's constant warmth, the structural force of it, the thing that had been building and focusing since he was born, and felt it orient. Not anxiously. Not with dread. With the clear, purposeful warmth of something that understood its direction. The diary, he said, and felt Freya look at him sharply. Something in Draco's father. At the feast, when Dumbledore announced the house cup, Draco looked, there's something his father gave him, or is planning to give him. Something old and cold the same way the Quirrell fragment was cold. He looked at Freya. It's going to Hogwarts next year. I don't know how yet. Freya looked at Baldur. Loki's going to want to be very involved in this, Baldur said. I know, Harry said. Let him. He paused. He'll be useful. He'll be insufferable, Freya said. Both, Harry said. Simultaneously. Baldur made the sound he made when something was genuinely funny, and he was not going to be seen to laugh because it would encourage further incidents of humor, and Freya's mouth curved, and Harry stood in King's Cross Station with his family around him and the warm June evening coming through the high glass roof and 7 years of gold behind him and the unfinished working of his mother's love carrying him forward. He was 11 years old and a god's son and a goddess's student and a mother's truest legacy, and the most feared dark wizard in a century had run from him, and his friends were waiting on a platform, and the oldest magic in creation lived in his chest like a hearth that had never gone cold. He was not afraid of what was coming. He was looking forward to it. Come on, he said. I'll tell you everything on the way home. Freya took his hand, the same hand she'd taken in a dark hallway under a staircase 7 years ago, leading him out of a cupboard and into the rest of his life, and they walked together through the station and out into the summer evening, and behind them the train let out one long last breath of steam, and the platform emptied, and the board showed all departures on time. Everything was on time. Everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. The story of Harr Baldurson, Harry Potter, son of Freya, son of Baldur, bearer of the oldest magic, was not finished. It was, in all the ways that mattered, just beginning.